Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we journey back in time to medieval Europe, a world of quiet villages and towering cathedrals, of castle walls and candlelit monasteries. In this gentle history, we will wander down old country lanes and through market squares, peek inside peasant cottages and great stone churches. We will listen to the soft chants of monks echoing in abbey halls and feel the hush of dawn over dew-covered fields. This is a bedtime exploration, meant to soothe as much as inform. So, find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you like, and let the calm narration carry you to a faraway time. Imagine the rhythmic clip-clop of a lone horse on a dirt road, or the distant tolling of a church bell marking the hour. Envision golden sunlight falling across rolling pastures and walled towns. The Middle Ages spanned centuries, roughly the 5th to 15th. But tonight, we'll experience it not as dates and battles, but as a tapestry of everyday life and sacred tradition. Together, we will explore how people lived, worked, and worshipped in a world very different from ours, yet full of simple beauty and community. As you listen, allow the slow pace of this story to lull you. Each chapter will guide you through a different aspect of medieval European life, from the natural landscape that cradled its villages, to the daily routines of peasants and nobles, to the serene grandeur of Gothic cathedrals. We will wander into the courtyard of a castle at twilight and across the cloisters of an abbey at dawn. We'll stroll through busy markets and along pilgrimage roads, winding through the countryside. The tone will remain soft and soothing. There is no hurry here, no looming peril, only the flow of seasons and the gentle rhythms of long-ago days. If your mind drifts, that's all right. You may simply float along on the descriptions, finding rest in the images of old Europe, a village church candle flickering at vespers, or a craftsman humming a tune as he carves wood by the fire. By blending historical detail with peaceful imagery, this narration aims to both inform and ease you into sleep. So take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of the day melt away. In your mind's eye, the mists of time part and reveal a tranquil medieval scene. Perhaps you see a valley with a river reflecting the sky, dotted with hamlets of thatched roofs and a stone chapel spire rising in the distance. Let's begin our journey there, in the calm embrace of medieval Europe. The geography and environment of medieval Europe. Our journey commences with the land itself, the geography and environment that shaped medieval life. Picture Europe as it was centuries ago. Vast forests cloaking the hills, wide rivers threading through plains, and only occasional clusters of human habitation interrupting nature's expanse. In the early medieval period, much of Europe was rural and sparsely populated. Outside the few cities and towns, one would travel for miles through countryside that alternated between woodlands, fields, and wild open heaths. In the thick woodlands of the north, tall oaks, beeches, and elms reached toward the sky. During winter, these woods turned solemn and still. Unlike today, evergreen fir trees were rare in medieval England and much of northern Europe. A traveller in midwinter would see mostly bare branches, a forest of brown and grey, with only an occasional holly bush offering a splash of green. The forest floor was neatly groomed by necessity. Local villagers gathered fallen sticks and branches for firewood regularly, so one would find little deadwood lying about. Through the silence, you might glimpse a red fox darting between the trees, or a shy red squirrel climbing a trunk. The air would be cold and carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant hearth. As seasons turned, so did the landscape's mood. In spring and summer, Europe's countryside came alive with greenery and the sounds of birds. Meadows bloomed with wildflowers, swaying gently in the breeze. Most medieval people lived in small villages nestled amidst this greenery. Around 90% of the population in places like England lived in rural communities. These villages were often situated in fertile valleys or clearings, where water and wood were nearby. A stream or pond was essential. Easy access to fresh water was a prerequisite for a settlement. From the village centre, pastures and fields radiated outward. Medieval farmlands did not resemble the neat, hedged parcels we see today. Instead, one giant open field could stretch toward the horizon, divided only by mental boundaries or low ridges into long strips of land. Each strip was tended by a different family, and together they formed a patchwork quilt of crops. In the warm sun of late summer, you could stand at the edge of such a field and see peasants bent over in the distance, moving slowly down the rows with their sickles, harvesting wheat or rye. Without fences or hedges to break up the view, it was just an undulating sea of gold, dotted by the figures of farmers working in unison. Forests and fields were complemented by marshes, mountains, and rivers across Europe's diverse regions. In the north, thick forests like the German Schwarzwald, Black Forest, blanketed hillsides, while in the south, the Mediterranean climate created drier landscapes of scrub and olive groves. But whether one was in Scandinavia or Spain, nature was an ever-present neighbor in medieval life. The vast majority of people earned their living from the land, so weather and seasons dictated the rhythm of existence. Gentle rains in spring meant hope for the crops. A late frost or summer drought could spell hardship. Villages often lay under the protection of larger natural features. Perhaps a hamlet was tucked against the edge of an ancient forest, which provided game and timber. Another might perch on a hill, overlooking a winding river, its fields sloping down to the water's edge. Rivers were the lifeblood of medieval settlements. They supplied drinking water, powered water wheels for grinding grain, and served as highways for transporting people and goods by boat. One can imagine standing on a wooden bridge in the early morning, watching the mist lift off the surface of a river as villagers fill their buckets, or fishermen cast nets from small coracles. The environment shaped not only practical life, but also the medieval imagination. Great mountains at the fringes of a community might be shrouded in Dowslade folklore, their peaks seen as the dwelling of saints or dragons in local legend. Deep woods were both larders and liminal spaces, full of game to hunt and wood to gather, yet also mysterious realms where a traveller could get lost if not careful. By day, forests echoed with birdsong and the chatter of woodcutters. By night, they grew dark and whisper quiet, save for the distant howl of a wolf or hoot of an owl. Despite later romantic notions of a pristine, untouched wilderness, medieval Europeans were actively modifying their environment. Over generations, they cleared portions of forest for new fields and pastures. Deforestation was already underway in many regions long before modern times. People understood that their survival depended on harnessing nature. They dug ditches to drain marshy land for farming. They terraced hillsides to plant vines or grain, and they managed woods with techniques like coppicing, cutting trees to allow regrowth, to ensure a steady supply of timber. As one scholar notes, any long-inhabited environment bore the mark of generations of active human alteration. The Europe inherited by the Middle Ages was not in any way pristine. Generations of farmers and shepherds had already shaped it with their ploughs and grazing flocks. Yet, for all the ways humans altered the land, they also lived humbly within its limits. Technology was simple, and power over nature was modest. A bad storm, an early frost, or a too hot summer could undo a year's work. People respected the natural world with a mix of fear and reverence. They saw it as God's creation, sometimes benevolent, sometimes threatening. Medieval writings occasionally describe nature as an adversary to be battled, an uncaring wilderness that had to be subdued for civilization. At the same time, there was appreciation for nature's beauty and bounty. The Church taught that the wonders of creation reflected the glory of the Creator. Each day and each season, medieval folk were intimately aware of their environment. Consider the daily routine of a peasant farmer. He rises at dawn to the rooster's crow and the first light glimmering over misty fields. Stepping outside his cottage, he might feel the dew wet on his boots and hear the gentle rush of the village brook. In the distance, crows call from the oak trees by the wood's edge. The air smells of earth and greenery in spring, of dry straw and dust in late summer, of wood smoke in autumn. These sensory details formed the backdrop of life, constant and reassuring in their cycle. In many regions, the year could be marked by how the landscape looked and felt. The fresh green shoots of March, in a temperate climate, signaled it was time for ploughing the fields. The long, bright days of June brought the first hay harvest, when meadows were mown and the sweet scent of cut grass filled the village. By late summer, fields stood tall with grain, and families worked together to bring in the crops under the warm sun. After the harvest, autumn's chill would begin creeping in. Trees turned gold and red along village lanes. Farmers led their pigs into the forest to forage for acorns amid the rustling leaves, a traditional practice in some places. And then the first frost silvered the fields, ushering in the quiet of winter once more. Winter in a medieval village was a time of rest and survival. Snow might carpet the ground, muffling sounds and forcing travel to halt. People stayed close to home, tending to chores like mending tools or spinning wool by the fire. On particularly cold nights, families gathered around the central hearth of their cottages, sharing warmth. The walls were thin, and the wind often leaked through cracks, so the fire was vital. One famous medieval illustration for the month of February shows a peasant family indoors, lifting their garments toward the flames to warm themselves. Outside, the scene is frigid. A man chops wood, his breath visible in the air, while another peasant hurries home with a bundle of sticks, blowing on his hands to keep them warm. Such images remind us how closely attuned to nature's challenges people were. Yet there is a comforting domesticity in that picture of the family by the fire, a sense that even in the depths of winter, the home could be a cozy refuge against the cold world outside. Thus, the geography and environment of medieval Europe provided more than just a backdrop. It was the stage upon which all daily dramas played out, and an actor in those dramas as well. The soil yielded food, the forests gave wood and game, the rivers offered fish and transport. In return, people adapted to what the land and sky gave each year. They built their villages in harmony with the terrain, their houses often using local stone, timber, or clay, blending into the landscape. Even the layout of a village showed a dialogue with nature. Cottages, placed on slightly higher ground to avoid floods, or clustered to break the force of the wind. As you picture this medieval countryside, allow the peacefulness of the scene to envelop you. See the patchwork of fields and woods extending to the horizon under a wide sky. Hear the faint sound of a water wheel turning in the mill by the stream, the distant lowing of cattle coming home at dusk. In the next chapter, we will step closer into one of those villages and explore the daily lives of its people, the common folk who made their world turn through simple routines. But for now, take a moment to wander in this mental landscape. There is no rush, only the slow change of daylight, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the steady heartbeat of nature carrying on as it has for ages. Daily life of peasants, merchants, and nobles. With the backdrop of nature in mind, let us now enter the human world and observe a typical day unfolding for different people in medieval Europe. From the humblest peasant to the town merchant to the lord in his manor, each had their own routines and rhythms. We will follow the sun's path across the sky, glimpsing morning in a village, noon in a market town, and evening in a lord's hall. Through these vignettes, the ordinary patterns of medieval daily life come into gentle focus. Morning in the village. In a small farming village, dawn is just breaking. A rooster's crow echoes, and a pale light creeps over the fields. One by one, cottage doors open, and peasants step out into the cool morning air. A farmer pauses to stretch, seeing his breath as a mist in the chill. His wife ladles out coarse bread and pottage from the pot hung over last night's embers, a simple breakfast to fuel the long day ahead. By our standards, life for these peasants is extremely rustic. Around 85% of medieval people were peasants of one kind or another, bound to agriculture and the seasons. Their days were filled with physical labor, but there was also a reassuring routine in that labor, a steady pattern that repeated with each sunrise. Today, the work begins early. In summer, a peasant's workday might start as soon as 3 a.m., when the sky is just turning from black to deep blue. With the first light, men and women head to the fields. The dew on the grass dampens their leather shoes as they walk to the long strips of land allocated to their family. Birds are singing from the hedgerows, and thin bands of mist lie over the low ground by the river, a tranquil start before toil. By mid-morning, the village green is empty, as nearly everyone is out doing something, ploughing, weeding, or tending livestock. If it is spring, perhaps the men are guiding wooden ploughs drawn by oxen through the soil, carving neat furrows for sowing seeds. Neighbors often work side by side and helped each other. Ploughing a heavy field, for instance, might take several households cooperating, each contributing an ox to the team. There is a sense of community in these joint efforts. Children shoo crows from the freshly turned earth and refill water for the oxen. Women might follow behind with baskets, dropping seeds into the furrows and covering them lightly with earth using a hoe. The rhythm of peasant life is tied intimately to these tasks. It is hard work, but it has its own calm cadence. The sounds of the village morning are the lowing of cattle, the crack of a whip urging oxen on, the rustle of wind through young wheat, and occasional chatter between farmers across the field. A young man might wave to his cousin a few strips over, calling out a friendly jibe about whose rows are straighter. The labor is constant, but not rushed. They pace themselves because the day is long. By the time the sun climbs high, most peasants have been working for hours and take a brief rest at midday. Under the shade of a tree at the field's edge, they unwrap some bread and cheese, maybe an onion or a few salted fish, and share a simple meal. They drink ale or diluted wine carried from home in a leather flask, since plain water is considered unsafe and rarely drunk. As they eat, they might talk about the weather, always a vital topic, or exchange village news in low voices, mindful not to disturb the peaceful hush of noon. After this break, work resumes until dusk. Daily life revolves around the agrarian calendar and the sun's cycle. In busy seasons like harvest, the work goes on relentlessly from sunrise to sunset. But even this has a quietly reassuring aspect. There is a famous observation that medieval peasants, despite their toil, did find moments of rest and observance. Church feast days and holy days periodically gave them a pause from labor. On those days, both lord and peasant were expected to refrain from work and attend Mass or celebrate, offering a prosynode, respite from the routine. But on an ordinary day like the one we are imagining, the peasant's focus is on the tasks at hand. As the light begins to fade in late afternoon, villagers slowly make their way home. They guide the oxen back to the byre and lead sheep or goats from pasture. The village comes alive again at day's end. The smith's hammer rings out as he finishes mending a ploughshare, and the air carries the comforting smells of wood smoke and cooking from each hearth. Inside the small thatched cottages, life is simple and communal. A typical peasant house might be just one room, with walls of wattle and daub-woven sticks plastered with mud, and a thatched roof. There are no chimneys or glass windows. Instead, smoke from the cooking fire drifts out through a hole in the roof or the cracks of a loose thatch, often filling the room with haze. The furnishings are sparse, perhaps a couple of rough stools, a trestle table, some straw pallets for sleeping, and a wooden chest, holding the family's meager possessions. In one corner, separated by a low partition, a few animals might shelter for the night. It's not uncommon for a calf, some chickens, or a piglet to share the living space, especially in winter. This arrangement helps keep the animals safe and the house slightly warmer with their body heat. After dark, the family gathers around the hearth. The fire provides light along with warmth, since candles are a luxury for many. Maybe a single tallow candle, made of animal fat, or an oil lamp burns, its faint glow revealing smoke-stained walls and rafters. Children quietly mend nets or sort seeds for tomorrow, while parents talk in low tones. They might recite a prayer or tell a folk tale. Outside, the village lanes are quiet under the stars. Save for the occasional bark of a dog or the sigh of wind, all is still. By the time the church bell, if the village has one, rings for compline, the final prayer of the day, most families are already drifting to sleep, exhausted, but wrapped in the small comfort of their routine and their close-knit community. Midday in the town. Now let us shift our view to a different setting. A bustling market town at noontime. Unlike the sleepy village, a town is a hub of activity and trade. Picture a walled town of modest size. Its population might be only a few thousand at most, but in comparison to the countryside, it feels crowded. Narrow, winding streets are lined with timber-framed houses whose upper floors jut out overhead, nearly touching across the lane. The cobbled street is alive with people, merchants crying their wares, buyers haggling, children darting between stalls, and carts creaking along with goods. Chickens cluck and peck at stray grain underfoot, and somewhere a baker's boy is loudly advertising fresh bread. Market day is in full swing. In the central square, stalls with striped awnings display produce from nearby villages. Heaps of cabbages and carrots, baskets of eggs, wheels of cheese. The smell of freshly baked rye bread mingles with that of cured fish and leather goods. Here, a farmer's wife sells bundles of garlic and onions. There, a potter lays out his sturdy clay jugs and bowls. Among them stroll townsfolk and visitors alike, perhaps a travelling monk on an errand for his monastery, or a noble steward sent to purchase supplies. The atmosphere is lively, but not frantic. People move at a deliberate pace, taking time to chat and barter. A group of housewives gossip cheerfully as they examine bolts of woolen cloth being offered by a travelling merchant. A troubadour with a lute might be seated on a corner, plucking a gentle tune to entertain passers-by in hopes of coins. Within the half-timbered buildings around the square are workshops and shops of various craftsmen. One might peek through an open doorway and see a carpenter at work, sawdust on the floor, the sound of his saw adding to the town's chorus of noise. Next door, the blacksmith's forge emits a rhythmic clang as he hammers a glowing piece of iron on his anvil. These artisans usually belong to guilds, associations that oversee each trade. Guilds maintain standards, train apprentices, and look after their members much like a family. In fact, in towns, the concept of family often extends to include apprentices living with the master craftsman's household. An apprentice, typically a boy of 12 or 14, might spend years working under a master, learning the craft in exchange for room, board, and training. He becomes part of the household, eating at the master's table, and sometimes even sleeping in the workshop loft. Over time, he will progress to journeyman and, if talented and fortunate, eventually produce a masterpiece to qualify as a master craftsman himself and join the guild. As midday sun filters down, let's imagine stepping into the cool interior of a merchant's home. Shop. The front room opens directly onto the street, and it doubles as a storefront. Barrels of goods are stacked against the walls, perhaps filled with salt or spices like pepper and cinnamon imported from far away, precious and pungent. Bolts of fabric hang from rafters, and the merchant's scales and ledgers sit on a counter. The merchant himself, a portly man in a burgundy wool tunic, is sitting on a stool, enjoying a bowl of stew, while his wife minds the counter. They have done well for themselves. As members of the mercantile class, they are not nobility, but they are free and relatively comfortable compared to peasants. They live above the shop in a few cramped rooms, but those rooms boast some niceties. Perhaps glass in a window, a sure sign of prosperity, colourful tapestries on the walls to keep out draughts, and ornate silver spoons locked away for special occasions. The merchant's day is filled with commerce and social dealings. He likely rose at dawn as well, but instead of ploughing fields, he opened his shop and checked his inventory. By mid-morning, he might have met a trade caravan arriving through the city gate, negotiating for a sack of Flemish wool or a crate of Italian wine. Town life runs on commerce. Everything has a price and a measurement. He uses coins to buy his bread rather than baking it himself, and he must mind the town's tolls and fees when he brings goods to market. The town has its own hierarchy and governance, perhaps a council of burghers or aldermen, and our merchant is a respected member of that community, possibly even an officer in his guild. In the evening, after closing up shop, he might join fellow guild members at a tavern for a tankard of ale, discussing business and town matters by the firelight. The conversation could range from the new tax the Lord has levied on the town, to the quality of this year's wool crop, to news of distant ports. Town dwellers like these merchants live at the crossroads of information. Their world, while geographically small, is mentally broader than that of isolated villagers. Yet, for all its difference in setting, even town life has a reassuring regularity. The church bell rings at certain hours here too, and many shops close for the short duration of the Mass so that people can attend. Curfew bells will toll at night to signal the time to bank the fires and clear the streets. And the merchant's family follows routines not unlike any family. Meals at certain times, prayers before bed, work, and rest in their turn. In the heart of even the busiest town, there remain moments of peace. The lull of trade in the afternoon, when the streets grow quieter, or the sound of the evening hymn, wafting from the church as shutters are closed and doors latched for the night. Evening in the manor hall. Now, as our imaginary sun dips low, casting long shadows over fields and town walls alike, let us visit the third tier of medieval society, the nobility, and see how their day concludes. We travel to a manor house, or perhaps a castle's great hall, where the lord, lady, and their household are gathered for the evening meal. The hall is a grand space compared to a peasant's cottage, with high ceilings and stone or whitewashed walls. A long trestle table is set up, and the lord and lady sit at the high table on a raised dais, while knights, ladies in waiting, and important guests sit along the sides. Servants bustle about, bringing in dishes from the kitchen, roasted meats, pies, and trenchers of bread to serve as plates. There is wine and ale aplenty, and the aroma of spices, a true mark of luxury, perhaps cinnamon or ginger in a sauce, perfumes the air. Despite the richness of the scene, it's worth noting that even nobles did not enjoy all the comforts we might assume. Castles and manor houses could be draughty, cold, and dimly lit. The stone halls are heated only by large fireplaces, which cannot fully chase away the chill in winter. Windows, if they have glass at all, are small to keep out the weather. At night, the halls are illuminated by flickering torches or lamps that give off more smoke than light. One chronicle wryly observes that comfort was hard to find even for the wealthy. Stone floors, tiny windows, and smoky candles meant that nobles often wore furs and layers indoors to stay warm. Fleas and bedbugs did not respect social class. The finest feather bed could still hide those tiny pests, just as straw pallets did. So our lord and lady cherish the roaring hearth, and the heavy tapestries hung on the walls that help insulate their living space. This evening, a tapestry depicting a hunting scene rustles gently when a draught sneaks in, each time the servants open the door from the kitchen. By now, the lord's day at work is largely done. Earlier, his day might have involved overseeing his estate's accounts, presiding over the manor court to settle disputes among his tenants, or practicing martial skills like swordplay and riding. A noble's life is not all leisure. He has responsibilities to manage his lands and ensure those living under his protection are doing their duties and paying their rents or taxes. The lady of the house, too, had spent her day managing the household, giving orders to the cook and servants, doing needlework, perhaps teaching the children their letters or prayers. They likely attended Mass in their private chapel in the morning. Piety and routine intertwined for the upper classes, just as for others. Now in the great hall, after supper, comes a time for leisure and entertainment. A group of minstrels may play softly on harp and flute from a corner of the hall. Their gentle melodies provide a soothing backdrop to conversation. Perhaps one bard recites a chivalric romance poem in a rhythmic, lulling voice that blends with the crackling of the fire. The lord listens, a golden goblet of spiced wine in hand, his thoughts drifting with the music. Some evenings might feature more boisterous entertainment, jugglers, acrobats, or the court jester telling jokes to provoke laughter. But tonight seems a quieter night. Servants move quietly around, refilling cups and clearing away wooden plates, trenchers that have been soaked through with gravy. At the high table, under a canopy embroidered with the family crest, the lord and lady exchange a few soft words, perhaps commenting on the fine quality of this year's venison, or remarking on the story being told by the bard. As darkness deepens outside, the household begins to retire. In a castle, some might sleep in private chambers, if they are high-ranking. Others make do in the hall itself. It was not uncommon for lesser nobles, knights, and attendants to roll out bedding on the floor of the great hall once the tables were pushed aside. Tonight, however, let us imagine this is a smaller manor, where most have chambers. The lord and lady retreat to their solar, a more intimate upstairs room, where a small fire may be lit and a lone oil lamp burns with a steady glow. Through an arrow-slit window, they can see the night sky spangled with stars. It's quiet. From the window they might faintly hear an owl or the distant howl of a wolf beyond the manor's fields. These sounds underscore the safety and warmth they enjoy indoors. The lady perhaps takes up a psalter, a book of psalms, and by the lamp's light reads a few lines of evening prayer. The lord, feeling content after the meal, dozes in a cushioned chair. Their day ends not so differently from that of the peasants, with prayer and rest, though the scale and comfort surrounding them are worlds apart. Thus, from peasant to merchant to noble, we see three slices of medieval daily life. Each has its own character. The peasant's day is governed by the land and physical labor, the merchant's by commerce and the bustling town schedule, the noble's by responsibility and privilege. Yet there are common threads. All rise with the sun and sleep with the night, their lives illuminated by the same sun and moon. All hear the church bell calling to prayer, whether in a village chapel, a town church, or a castle chapel. All enjoy the fellowship of family or community around a meal at day's end. In those fundamental human experiences, work, food, faith, and rest, the divisions of class might fade for a moment. As you imagine these scenes, notice how even the busiest moments contain seeds of tranquility. The monotonous scything of grain in the field can become almost meditative, the work of falling into a steady rhythm with each swing. Swish, crunch, swish, crunch, under the summer sky. The market's noise, after a while, turns into a comforting hum of human activity, like a lively daytime lullaby. And the quiet luxury of the noble hall after dinner, with music echoing softly off stone walls, can lull even a wary mind towards sleep. Daily life in medieval times was certainly not easy. It could be, as one medieval saying goes, nasty, brutish, and short for many. Yet we are choosing to focus on its gentler aspects. The predictability that gave people comfort, the communal bonds that gave them strength, and the spiritual rituals that gave them hope. By now, our medieval village has fallen asleep. The town's lights are extinguished one by one, and the castle's torches are dimmed. A calm darkness blankets the land. In that peaceful darkness, we shall move on to explore the awe-inspiring structures that rose out of this society, the great cathedrals that still stand today, symbols of faith and artistry. But before we leave the subject of daily life, take a moment to reflect. No matter who or where they were, medieval people ended their day under the same stars we see now. Perhaps a peasant, lying on his straw bed after a long day, gazed through the open door at the night sky and felt a similar sense of wonder and smallness that we might feel. In those quiet moments, the commoners, merchants, and nobles of medieval Europe all shared in the simple human ritual of seeking rest and renewal for tomorrow. Architecture and symbolism of cathedrals. Rising above the medieval landscape were the great cathedrals, soaring stone churches that seemed to bridge earth and heaven. To a weary peasant approaching a town after days of walking, the sight of a cathedral's spire in the distance was like a beacon. By design, cathedrals were awe-inspiring. They were often the tallest, most ambitious structures humans built at that time, visible for miles around as symbols of faith and communal pride. But beyond their impressive scale, cathedrals were rich with meaning and artistry. Every arch, every carving, every colored pane of glass was intended to teach or uplift. Let us stroll slowly now into one of these sacred spaces, appreciating both its architecture and the gentle symbolism it carries. Imagine approaching the west facade of a Gothic cathedral on a tranquil morning. The sun has just risen behind you, and its rays illuminate the elaborate stone carvings around the great doors. These entrances, called portals, are framed by archways crowded with sculptures of saints, apostles, and biblical scenes. Even before a worshipper steps inside, the building itself begins to tell sacred stories. In an age when many could not read, the cathedral was a book in stone, an eloquent visual scripture open to all. A 15th century farmer might gaze up at the carved figures of wise and foolish virgins over one door, or prophets and kings over another, and absorb moral lessons without a single word spoken. The builders intended it so. They made the cathedrals to instruct and inspire ordinary people. Now the great bronze doors swing open, and we step inside. Immediately, a hush falls. The bustle of the town square behind us is replaced by an echoing stillness. High, slender columns line the nave, the long central space, drawing the eyes upward to ribbed vaults that soar like the canopy of an ancient forest above. This vertical emphasis is no accident. The architects of Gothic cathedrals used pointed arches and clever engineering to pull the structure higher and higher, all to create an impression of reaching toward the heavens. Standing within, you feel tiny and humbled, yet also uplifted, as if your spirit could rise with those stone arches and touch the sky. Sunlight streams through stained glass windows, splashing the interior with patches of ruby red, sapphire blue, and emerald green. These windows themselves are stories. In their colored glass are scenes of the Bible, the lives of saints, and even depictions of everyday medieval occupations. A subtle reminder that all labor, all life, is under God's gaze. The air is cool and faintly perfumed with incense and candle wax. As your eyes adjust to the dimmer light, you notice how harmonious everything is. The architecture, though grand, feels orderly and rhythmic. Each pillar and arch seems placed according to a divine geometry. Indeed, medieval builders often saw their work as an imitation of cosmic order. The geometry and proportions of cathedrals were sometimes chosen to reflect theological numbers or harmony. Light itself was a symbol. By flooding the space with colored light through the stained glass, they evoked the presence of the divine. One might say a Gothic cathedral is a symphony of stone and light, carefully composed so that even an illiterate villager could sense the majesty of God by simply standing in that space. Let us walk slowly down the nave. Our footsteps fall softly on the worn stone floor, where generations of worshippers have walked before. Above us, the pointed arches of the nave arcade arc gracefully from pillar to pillar. These pointed arches were a hallmark of Gothic design. Unlike earlier round Romanesque arches, the pointed shape distributed weight more efficiently, allowing walls to be taller and pierced by large windows. The result is exactly what we experience: towering walls that nonetheless contain vast expanses of glass. It's as if the stone itself has been transformed into lace, delicate yet strong. Outside, supporting the height, one can see the flying buttresses, those wing-like stone supports that leap from the outer walls to brace the building. But from within, they are out of sight. Here we only sense the freedom they give the architecture. The ceiling seems to float, held up by faith as much as by engineering. Midway down the nave, we come upon a slab in the floor with a strange pattern, perhaps the labyrinth of Chartres, a winding maze inlaid in the stone. In some cathedrals, pilgrims would walk this labyrinth in prayerful meditation, symbolizing the long spiritual journey of life. Every element, even the floor, invited contemplation. We continue onward, towards the glowing eastern end of the church. Here stands the high altar, often beneath a ring of light-filled windows, called the clerestory. In some cathedrals, as at Chartres in France, the clerestory windows are enormous rose windows, circular masterpieces of stained glass that bloom like giant, radiant flowers of light in the stone wall. These rose windows, often dedicated to Mary, symbolized heavenly perfection and the Virgin's pure role as the Rose of Sharon. When sunlight pours through them, the entire cathedral is washed in colored light. One can imagine attending a mass at dawn, the rays of the rising sun turning the interior into a kaleidoscope, a mystical experience that must have felt like standing inside the pages of an illuminated manuscript or a dream. Take a moment to sit in a wooden choir stall near the front, where the monks or canons would chant their daily offices. Feel the immense space around you. Though built of hard stone, the cathedral has acoustics that make sound linger and drift like something alive. If you speak, your voice will carry in gentle echoes along the vaults. If a choir is singing Gregorian chant, as perhaps they are in the distance, the notes seem to descend from above, bathing the listener in a lullaby of reverence. It's easy to close your eyes and be transported by the ethereal harmonies. The architecture and music together create a sensation of peace that is almost otherworldly. Indeed, that was the goal, to lift the soul away from worldly troubles towards a higher plane. Looking up again at the architecture, consider the symbols built into the very layout. Most cathedrals are cruciform. The ground plan is in the shape of a cross when viewed from above. The long nave is the body of the cross, and the shorter transepts form its arms. This reminds anyone entering that they are literally walking into the arms of the cross, the central symbol of Christianity. At the crossing, where nave and transept intersect, often rises a central tower or dome, further drawing the eye up to the heavens. The eastern end, usually hosting the altar, often points toward the sunrise, symbolizing resurrection and hope. The people of the Middle Ages poured immense resources and effort into building these cathedrals. Many took decades or even centuries to complete. Entire communities contributed. The wealthy donated funds or land. Skilled craftsmen like masons, carpenters, and glassmakers lent their artistry. Common labourers hauled stones and mixed mortar year after year. It was, in many cases, the work of generations. A grandfather might cut stone for the foundation, his son carve statues for the facade, and his grandson see the final spire completed long after. Despite the slow progress, there was a shared sense of purpose and faith driving the project. As one historian noted, the medieval cathedrals were the greatest accomplishments of humanity in the whole theatre of art, encompassing architecture at its peak and virtually every kind of artistic craft. Stonemasonry, sculpture, stained glass, metalwork, carpentry, all came together in a single grand creation. One can spend a lifetime admiring a cathedral and still discover new details every day. Consider the gentle messages embedded in those details. High above, along the roofline, there are sculpted angels and saints looking down as if guarding the city. On the exterior buttresses, carved grotesques and gargoyles jut out, perhaps frightening in form, but their purpose is practical: to spout rainwater away from the walls, and symbolic: to ward off evil. In the portals, Christ might be depicted as a serene king, flanked by symbols of the four evangelists: a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, representing the gospel writers. These figures have kindly faces and flowing robes carved in stone, enduring through the ages. Their expressions often carry a slight smile or a calm gravitas, inviting the onlooker to reflect on the stories they represent. Now, the afternoon sun is climbing high, and shafts of light move across the columns. In a quiet corner of the cathedral, a side chapel flickers with dozens of votive candles left by the faithful. Each little flame dances in the stillness, representing prayers and hopes. The light of candles and the glow through stained glass work together in the dim interior, creating a sacred ambience. You might notice how the stained glass colors play on the stone pillars. A patch of blue here, a dappling of red there. Medieval thinkers saw light itself as a divine manifestation, and the cathedral was a container for holy light. Some writings of the time describe how colored light streaming in could elevate the mind from the material to the spiritual. Sitting in this mottled light, one can easily drift into a contemplative mood. Let's walk along one side aisle now, where sunlight from a lancet window creates a patterned glow on the floor. We pass by an alcove where a sculptor's handiwork is on display, a relief of the nativity scene carved decades or centuries ago. Mary and Joseph, the baby Jesus, the ox and ass, all carved in tender detail from the stone, their features softened by time. Nearby, there may be the Don Neist, tomb of a bishop or a knight, a marble effigy lying in repose atop a sarcophagus with hands folded in eternal prayer. These monuments remind us that the cathedral was not just a place of worship, but also the resting place for notable figures, sanctifying their memory within the holy space. But even these stone effigies, often depicted in peaceful slumber, contribute to the tranquil atmosphere. They lie as if sleeping, in quiet acceptance of mortality and faith in resurrection. The architecture of the cathedral also cleverly directs one's experience. As you move toward the altar, the space usually becomes more intricate and brighter. The most sacred part, the choir and altar area, might be surrounded by a ring of illuminated windows depicting the heavenly city or the lives of saints, reinforcing the feeling that one is nearing something luminous and divine. During a Mass, as the Eucharist is elevated at the altar, sunlight might pour through the eastern window, bathing the moment in an ethereal glow. It's a choreography of light and stone, intended to deepen the spiritual drama. Even if one were to visit in silence, without any service happening, the building alone preaches a silent sermon of peace, hope, and the grandeur of creation. One medieval abbot, Suger of Street, Dennis, who pioneered many Gothic ideas, wrote of how the beauty of his church's decorations lifted his soul from the material to the immaterial. We can feel a touch of that now. Maybe your eyes trace the line of a column upward, following it to where it blossoms into a ribbed vault arching across the ceiling. There, the ribs meet and form a delicate pattern like the petals of a lily. Suger believed such beauty could lead the mind to God, and indeed in this moment, the complexity and harmony overhead might stir something transcendent in you. The architect seems to have captured a piece of the sky and taught the stone to imitate the stars in their courses. One lovely comparison often made is that a Gothic cathedral's interior resembles a forest. The tall, clustered columns are like tree trunks, the pointed arches like the meeting of branches overhead, and the vaulted ceiling like a canopy of leaves. Standing among them, one feels sheltered in a sacred grove of stone. Medieval people were very familiar with forests, places of mystery and natural awe, so perhaps they felt that parallel instinctively. In a forest, one might feel small under ancient trees, yet touched by nature's grandeur. In a cathedral, one felt humble under man-made trees, yet touched by divine grandeur. Our visit to this cathedral has been slow and deliberate, which is fitting. These spaces were meant for unhurried reflection. A traveller in the Middle Ages might spend hours in a cathedral just marvelling, praying, or finding solace from the world outside. Even today, stepping into such a building can feel like entering a different time and space, where the noise and rush of modern life are muted. For a bedtime journey such as ours, the cathedral offers a perfect refuge of calm. As we prepare to leave, imagine once more the soft strains of a choir practicing somewhere in the distance. The notes reverberate through the nave in long, soothing echoes. Candles flicker on an altar to Mary at a side chapel, and a faint whiff of incense still hangs in the air from the morning's mass. Walking back down the nave toward the exit, you pass a priest quietly sweeping the floor, or a couple of townsfolk murmuring prayers by a statue of a saint. Everyone speaks in hushed voices, if at all, as though not to disturb the serenity that dwells here. We step outside again, into the daylight of the town square. The doors close behind us, and the spell of the cathedral gently releases. Yet some of its peace stays with you, as you carry the memory of that cool, coloured light and lofty space. In medieval Europe, these cathedrals were the beating heart of spirituality and community, hosting daily worship, seasonal festivals, and offering sanctuary in troubled times. They stood then, as they do now, as testaments to what human hands and faithful hearts can create together. In our next chapter, we will turn to the social structure that shaped medieval life, the feudal system of lords, vassals, and serfs. But let us carry forward a bit of the cathedral's tranquility as we go, like a secret lantern of grace illuminating the path. The feudal system, lords, vassals, and serfs. Medieval European society was organized like a great pyramid or chain, with each person linked by bonds of loyalty and service. This structure is often called the feudal system. Though the term feudalism is modern and medieval people didn't use it themselves, they certainly lived its reality. At its heart, feudalism was about mutual obligations, protection in exchange for service, land in exchange for loyalty. It created an interdependent world where everyone, from the mightiest king to the lowliest serf, had a defined place and role. Understanding this system helps one appreciate the sense of order and security, however imperfect, that underpinned daily life, much like the strong foundation of a building that isn't always seen but holds everything up. Imagine a quiet ceremony taking place in the great hall of a castle one autumn afternoon. A young knight kneels before an older lord. Sunlight from a high window catches motes of dust as it falls on the pair. The hall is hushed. A few witnesses, dressed in rich tunics, stand by. The knight places his hands together, extending them upward, and the Lord clasps them between his own hands. In a solemn voice, the knight swears fealty. He promises to be the Lord's man, to serve him faithfully, even to the death. The Lord then lifts the knight to his feet and gives him a symbolic kiss on the cheek, the kiss of peace. A steward brings forth a large parchment, and the Lord points to it. It is a charter granting the knight a fief, a piece of land, to govern and draw income from. With that, the young man has become the Lord's vassal and has been enfeoffed with land. This act of homage and fealty is one of the cornerstones of feudal society. It is a quiet, formal moment, full of reverence for duty and loyalty. In feudal hierarchy, at the very top sat the king, or in some regions, the queen. The king was like the apex of the pyramid, theoretically owning all the land in the realm by right. Of course, a king could not manage or defend all his territory alone, so he granted large portions of it to his chief nobles, dukes, earls, counts, in return for their loyalty and service. These nobles, in turn, became the king's vassals, swearing oaths to support him with troops or counsel when needed. In exchange, they held their lands, their fiefs, effectively as their own domains, governing the people there and reaping the profits. Each great lord, then, often granted portions of his lands to lesser lords or knights, creating another link in the chain. These lesser lords became vassals to the great lord and sub-vassals to the king. They too swore loyalty and might promise to provide a certain number of knights or soldiers in times of war, or attend the lord's court on certain feast days. In return, they received their own smaller fief to live off. This ladder could have several rungs. Kings is greater than high nobles, is greater than lesser nobles, is greater than knights. At each step, the principle was similar. Land and protection flowed downward. Service and loyalty flowed upward. It was often encapsulated in the phrase, "I serve you today, so that you protect me tomorrow." Finally, at the base of this social pyramid were the peasants, who made up the vast majority of the population. Many of them were serfs, agricultural laborers legally bound to the land they tilled. A serf was not a slave that could be bought or sold, but neither was he free to pack up and leave the manor at will. He owed his lord various kinds of labor and dues. In return, the lord owed him protection, shelter within the castle or behind strong walls in case of marauders, and the right to work a piece of land for his own family's sustenance. This arrangement was called manorialism, the economic side of feudalism. Life for serfs was hard and humble, but it was also stable in its own way. A serf knew exactly who his lord was and what was expected of him each week. So many days ploughing the lord's demesne fields, so many baskets of wheat or eggs owed as rent, perhaps a small tax at Easter or Christmas. In exchange, he had a cottage and plots to cultivate for himself, and the Lord's word that he could continue to live and work there. One can see how this hierarchical system, while unequal, knitted everyone together. The ideal was that when it worked smoothly, it led to peace and prosperity for everyone. Each person, high or low, was like a thread in a great tapestry, with the king at the center. If an outside threat arose, say, a neighboring ruler invaded, the king would call on his great lords for aid. They in turn would rally their knights and soldiers, each owing service for the lands they held. The common folk would be mustered to provide additional levies or to take shelter under their lord's protection in a castle. In theory, everyone had a role in defense and order. The nobles fought to protect, the clergy prayed, and the peasants labored to sustain society. This was sometimes called the three estates of medieval society: those who fight, those who pray, and those who work, each essential to the whole. Let's envision a peaceful scene that illustrates feudal relationships at their best. It is harvest time on a manor. The fields of wheat and barley are ripe and golden under the late summer sun. The lord of the manor, a middle-aged knight with greying hair, has ridden out with his retinue to observe the harvest. He sits astride a steady mare at the edge of the field, clad not in armor now, but in a simple tunic emblazoned with his coat of arms. With him are a few household knights and his stewards. In the field, dozens of serfs and free peasants, some peasants, were free tenants, work diligently, sickles flashing as they cut the grain. The Lord's presence today is not to supervise with a heavy hand, but to partake in an age-old tradition, the harvest boon. According to custom, he provides a hearty meal for all the villagers working his fields, as a gesture of goodwill during the busy harvest. At midday, an outdoor feast is spread under a large oak tree. The Lord's cooks have brought out bread, cheese, ale, roasted meats, and seasonal fruits. The laborers gather, sitting on the ground or on wagon carts, laughing and talking as they eat their fill, a welcome break from toil. The Lord himself walks among them, exchanging a kind word here or there. "Well done, Robert. Your field yielded fine this year." Or, "How is your new baby, Marie?" This is a moment of simple harmony. The serfs, who owed their lord the work of harvesting his demesnes, are thanked and fed. The Lord, who owes them protection and paternal care, fulfills a part of that duty. In this amicable atmosphere, one can sense the paternalistic ideal of feudalism, where the great were to look after the small and the small to honor the great. Of course, reality often fell short of the ideal. There were exploitative lords who taxed their peasants harshly, and there were disloyal vassals who betrayed their lords. But because we are painting a gentle portrait for our night's journey, we will dwell on the more benign aspects. Many lords genuinely saw themselves as guardians of their people. They held manorial courts to dispense justice, trying to settle disputes among villagers fairly. A serf who felt wronged by a neighbor stealing a pig could bring the case to the lord's court, and the lord or his steward would render judgment, ensuring some semblance of law at the local level. In return, villagers owed the lord respect, and occasionally they brought him small gifts: a dozen eggs, a basket of apples, on feast days, as tokens of their gratitude, or at least acknowledgement of dependency. Feudal bonds also extended upwards to the highest levels. Consider the relationship between a great lord and the king. The lord might hold vast territories and wealth, but he was expected to support the king's endeavors. If, The king decided to hold a grand Christmas court. The lord would travel with a retinue of knights, squires, and perhaps his family to attend, bringing gifts and showing splendor appropriate to his rank, thereby adding to the king's glory. At such gatherings, the web of loyalty was renewed in subtle ways, through oaths repeated, marriages arranged, tying noble families closer to the crown, and ceremonies performed. Picture a Christmas feast in the king's hall, where the king sits at the high table and his greatest vassals sit just below. When the first toast is raised, all the nobles stand and proclaim their allegiance with a cheer, the hall echoing with their voices. In that moment, feudal unity is on full display, and one imagines the common folk outside hearing the cheer and feeling reassured that their leaders stand together. There was also a spiritual dimension to feudal thinking. The church taught that just as God ruled over angels and humanity, and just as Father ruled a family, the king ruled the realm by divine sanction. This chain of authority was part of the natural order. Therefore, loyalty to one's lord was not merely a contractual matter, it had a sacred quality. Breaking an oath of fealty was considered both a legal crime and a sin. Conversely, lords were reminded by clerics of their duty to govern justly, for they would answer to the heavenly Lord for how they treated the souls in their care. We can imagine a wise old priest speaking to a newly minted lord. Remember, my son, that you hold these lands and lives in trust. As you are lord over your serfs, so God is Lord over us all. Be fair, be merciful, and rule with love, so that on Judgment Day you may be found worthy. Such counsel was not always heeded, but it existed as an ideal. For the purposes of a calming story, the feudal system can be seen as the scaffolding of medieval life, giving it shape and predictability. Most people were born into their station and expected to remain there. While that might sound stifling to modern ears, it also meant a simpler life in terms of expectations. A serf did not agonize over what career to pursue. He knew he would farm the same fields his father and grandfather did. A lord's second son knew from youth he might seek fortune by serving another lord or joining the church. As per custom, everyone had a script of sorts, written by tradition, in a world that could be dangerous and uncertain, with disease, poor harvests, or war always possible. Having a set place and duty was psychologically reassuring to many. As night falls on our mental picture of the medieval realm, consider how the feudal ties would manifest in times of crisis too. If a castle was threatened by invaders or outlaws, the local peasants would flee into its walls for protection. Huddled in the castle courtyard, they would find safety under their lord's banner, while the knights manned the battlements. That protection was the lord's end of the bargain. If famine struck the village, a good lord might open his granaries to feed his people. If a peasant died leaving orphans, the lord or lady might see to their upbringing. In return, if the lord was captured in battle, his vassals might contribute ransoms. If the lord's heir married, the peasants might owe a small gift or extra labor as a mark of celebration and duty. It was a reciprocal, if imbalanced, relationship designed to knit society into one fabric. Before we leave the topic of feudalism, let's revisit in a soothing summary. Envision a great chain stretching across a twilight sky. At the top, a crown glints, representing the king. Below it, a series of shields and banners, the heraldry of dukes and counts, each linked to the crown by golden cords of loyalty. Further down, more links, the arms of lesser lords and knights, connected to their overlords. And at the bottom, countless figures of peasants, holding up the whole chain with their toil, yet also held in place by it, anchored and secure. The chain sways gently in the night breeze, but it does not break. It is strong, yet flexible enough to carry the weight of a civilization. In the soft starlight of imagination, that feudal chain might even look beautiful, like a gently swinging lantern chain, carrying many little lamps, each lamp a household under the protection of one above. Feudalism was far from a utopian reality, but in our dreamy exploration, it provides a stable, interlocking pattern that underlies the calm of medieval life. Knowing that one has a lord to call upon, or vassals to rely on, eased some of life's uncertainties. Like a child feeling secure under the watch of a parent, medieval society found a kind of security in these layered bonds. As we now transition to the next chapter, where we'll explore castles and courtly life more deeply, we do so with an understanding that those castles and courts were part of this broader system, shining links in the chain of feudal order that gave medieval Europe its particular rhythm and sense of belonging. Castles and courtly life. No exploration of medieval Europe would be complete without visiting a castle, those storied strongholds of stone that still dot the landscapes. Castles capture the imagination with their towering battlements, drawbridges, and secret chambers. But beyond their military purpose, castles were also homes and centers of courtly life. Within their thick walls, lords and ladies pursued a daily routine that, at its best, combined responsibility with refinement, duty with leisure. Let us now gently wander through a day in a castle and glimpse the elegant tapestry of courtly life, all in a calm and undramatic fashion. A castle at dawn. Picture a castle atop a hill as the first light of morning colors the sky. Perhaps it is something like Chateau de Coucy in France or Windsor in England. Thick curtain walls encircling a cluster of stone buildings, and a proud keep, the central tower. A light mist clings to the moat, turning the still water into a mirror that reflects the castle's silhouette. The drawbridge is up for the night, but soon the guards will lower it to let in the farmers bringing fresh produce to the kitchens. Birds begin to sing in the nearby woods. Within the castle's courtyard, life stirs. A scullery maid crosses the yard, yawning, on her way to the well to draw water. Stable boys feed and brush the horses in the stables, who nicker softly in response. The castle's chapel bell rings a gentle tone, a call to matins, the dawn prayer. Some devout members of the household shuffle into the chapel, candles in hand, to start the day with devotion. Inside the keep, which houses the Lord's family and closest retainers, the morning sun filters through narrow, arched windows. In the great hall, the main room for living and dining, dust motes dance in the sunlight, slanting across the long wooden tables that are still empty from the night before. The hall is the heart of castle life. By day, a place of gatherings and meals. By night, a dormitory for many servants or men-at-arms who roll out their blankets by the dying hearth. Right now, it's quiet. A lone steward walks through, checking that the rushes on the floor are still clean and that the fire laid in the fireplace is ready to be lit. Soon, the lord and lady awaken in their private solar, a smaller upstairs living chamber that catches the morning sun. The lady's ladies in waiting help her dress in a fine gown of deep green wool, laced at the sides, and drape a veil over her braided hair. The lord dons a tunic and perhaps goes to the chapel to join the end of matins. By breakfast time, which is a light meal of bread, ale, maybe some cheese or pottage, the castle is fully awake. In the kitchen building, Fires crackle, and cooks are already preparing the day's meals. Spit roasting meats, grinding herbs and spices with mortar and pestle for sauces. The smell of baking bread wafts through the air, lending a homey comfort, even in a fortress. Daily business and pastimes. The Lord likely spends part of his morning on administrative duties. He might meet his steward to review accounts. How much grain came in from the rents? How many coins were spent on new roofing for the gatehouse? Perhaps today he will hold a brief court session, settling a dispute among the villagers who live on his lands. Maybe two farmers arguing over grazing rights. Sitting in a carved wooden chair in the great hall, he listens patiently to both sides, then renders a judgment with a fair-minded tone. His lady might sit beside him, or she might be in the solar supervising the castle's domestic concerns, directing the chamberlain about linens that need airing, or planning the evening's dinner menu with the cook, ensuring that the salted fish is soaked enough to remove the brine. By late morning, the formalities ease. The Lord, a keen hunter, decides to ride out with a small party for a hawking expedition, a favorite noble pastime. Dressed in a comfortable hunting outfit, he walks to the mews, the area where falcons and hawks are kept, on the castle grounds. His falconer is already waiting, cradling a sleek peregrine falcon on his gloved forearm. The falcon wears a tiny leather hood to keep it calm. A couple of hounds on leashes tug eagerly, sensing the outing. The lady joins as well, mounted on a gentle palfrey, with her own smaller merlin hawk perched nearby. Off they go, through the woods and fields, followed by attendants. The morning sun is pleasant, and the dew has dried. It's a perfect day for hawking. When they spot game, say, a rabbit, venturing from the hedges, the falconer removes the falcon's hood, and with a whoosh, the majestic bird takes flight. There's excitement as it circles and dives, but our focus is not on the kill, for we seek peaceful impressions. Instead, imagine the lord and lady trotting through sun-dappled glades, the lady laughing as a hound runs ahead, the lord breathing deep the fresh air. For them, this is both sport and communion with nature, a refreshing break from castle walls. Falconry is known as the sport of kings, requiring skill and patience as much as strength. When the falcon returns to the glove with its catch, it's praised and gently hooded again. By midday, the party returns to the castle, cheeks flushed from exertion, ready for the main meal. Midday meal and courtly graces. In the great hall, tables have been set for the day's dinner, what we'd call lunch. Medieval people often had their largest meal around noon. The hall is now lively with the household gathered. At the high table on the dais, the lord and lady sit with any honoured guests. Lower tables host the knights, squires, and ladies in waiting, and further down the servants may also partake after the upper tables are served. Before anyone eats, grace is said, a reminder of gratitude and the social harmony desired in this community meal. Then servants bring out trenchers stale flat, loaves of bread used as plates, and an array of dishes, perhaps a thick stew of venison and vegetables, roasted birds with pepper sauce, nobles loved spices, imported from afar, fresh baked bread, and for dessert, a custard tart flavoured with honey and raisins. There is a pleasant hum of conversation. People speak softly. Good manners are prized in courtly life. Knights toast one another or engage in friendly banter, boasting of past hunts or jousting victories, but not so loudly as to disturb the lord's table. The lady might be conversing with a visiting noblewoman about the latest court fashions or news from the royal court. One key aspect of courtly life was refined speech and courtesy. Indeed, the word courtesy itself stems from behaviors expected in the Lord's court. The ladies in waiting exchange humorous poems or sing quietly. A harpist might be playing gentle music in the background as people dine. If one listens, one might hear a snatch of a supposa, troubadour's lyric about chivalric love, or a saint's legend. After the meal, as people wipe their hands, for forks were not commonly used yet, fingers did the work, cleaned with a napkin and a basin of water at meal's end, entertainment or relaxation might follow. Perhaps today there is a troupe of travelling musicians or acrobats that has come to the castle seeking patronage. The great hall is cleared a bit, and they perform tumbling feats and juggling to the laughter and delight of all. The Lord rewards them with a few coins and a hearty meal for the road. Alternatively, on a quieter day, the afternoon might be spent in more leisurely pursuits. Some nobles may play games inside and outside as part of the castle's entertainment. Inside the castle they might enjoy board games such as chess, and ladies also enjoyed sewing and working on fine embroidery. Singing and dancing were also popular inside a medieval castle. For instance, one might see nobles and their families playing chess by a window, the sunlight on the intricate pieces carved like kings, queens, knights, and castles. Their voices are low as they plot moves and gently tease each other about impending defeat. The ladies might retire to the solar for what we might call crafts, embroidering tapestries or weaving. In our calm scene, a group of noblewomen sit by an open window in the solar, embroidering a rich wall hanging with fine silk threads. One embroiders a scene of flowers and songbirds, another a tiny castle with gold thread towers. As they sew, they chat in a friendly way. Perhaps one softly recites lines from a courtly romance, the tales of Lancelot and Guinevere, or Tristan and Isolde, to entertain the others. They giggle at the more dramatic love verses, then hush themselves so as not to drop stitches. This companionship in the solar is both industrious and intimate, part of the gentle rhythms of courtly life, where creating beauty in textiles, music, poetry was as valued as martial prowess. Evening festivities. As dusk approaches, the castle lights up with lanterns and torches. Tonight, perhaps a more formal entertainment is planned. Not a grand feast, unless it's a special occasion, but a tasteful evening gathering. The great hall's long tables have been pushed to the sides after dinner, and fresh rushes or sweet herbs like lavender have been scattered on the floor to keep the air pleasant. A minstrel troupe tunes their instruments, a lute, a fiddle, maybe a small harp, preparing to play soft music through the evening. The household assembles again in the hall. Some sit on benches or chairs, others casually on cushions or the edge of the dais. The Lord might invite one of the troubadours to perform a new song or recite a poem. The minstrel begins, strumming gently and singing of knightly valor or unrequited love in a melodic, soothing voice that blends with the crackling of the fire. All listen respectfully. A good courtier knows how to appreciate the arts. After a couple of songs, there might be dancing. Medieval dances at court were often stately and slow, more like pattern walking with elegant turns, unlike the lively folk dances of villages. The lady of the castle leads off one such dance, perhaps a carole, taking the hand of a noble guest, while others join in a ring. The music is a steady, lilting tune. By the golden glow of torches, the circle of dancers moves in time, skirts sweeping and embroidered sleeves linked together. Their expressions are content, even slightly dreamy. It is a gentle diversion, not wild, but communal and graceful. Later, as the night deepens, conversation flows. A favorite topic in these times is the art of chivalry and courtly love. One might hear a knight by the fire, debating what constitutes the ideal knightly virtue. Is it generosity, loyalty, prowess? With his fellows, in friendly argument. Another corner might find a young squire shyly composing a few lines of constay, praise for a lady he admires from afar, in the stylized language of courtly love. The atmosphere in the hall is warm, both from the large fireplace which now crackles with oak logs, and from the sense of camaraderie. In a castle, everyone from the lord to the lowliest cupbearer is part of one extended household. At this hour, the distinctions relax a little. The lord might clap a soldier on the back in good humor, or the lady might kindly compliment the cook on the excellent spice blend in the sauce at dinner. These small kindnesses bolster the loyalty and affection that hold the household together through more trying times. Eventually, one by one, people retire. The lord and lady bid everyone a good night and retreat to their chambers upstairs. Many others will bunk down right in the hall. The trestle tables will be shoved fully aside or taken down, and bedrolls spread out. A few servants and guards remain watchful. A castle is never entirely unguarded, even in peace. But soon, the castle finds relative quiet. A lone watchman on the tower walks his rounds beneath the stars, humming a little tune to himself as he peers over the parapet at the dark, sleeping lands below. Inside, the last embers in the great hall's hearth cast faint red glows on the stone walls, which are adorned with tapestries depicting tranquil forests and legendary heroes. Perhaps one tapestry shows a unicorn lying serenely in a garden, a symbol of purity and mystical grace. It seems fitting as a final image for the night. Thus ends a day of castle and courtly life. While castles are homes, they were also centers of life with lords, knights, and many servants and entertainers coming through. We have chosen to highlight the peaceful and cultured side of that life, the moments of courtesy, hospitality, and artistic expression. Though castles often saw sieges and intrigues, in our calm telling, we focus on the daily routines that brought stability and elegance to aristocratic life. We saw the lord balancing duty and leisure, the lady guiding the household with grace, and the entire castle community sharing in music and laughter by day's end. From within those stout walls came not only power, but also patronage of the arts, and a code of chivalry that idealized honor and kindness, even if reality sometimes fell short. As we take our leave of the castle grounds, picture one last serene scene, outside the keep, in the castle garden under the moonlight. Perhaps a lady's maid lingers to smell a night-blooming rose, or a squire sits quietly on the steps, gazing at the stars and dreaming of adventures to come. The castle towers stand guard around them, venerable and strong, ivy clinging to the stones. From one high window, the soft light of a candle in a chamber, maybe the lady reading a devotional book before bed, flickers like a tiny star. You feel utterly safe in this fortress turned home, lulled by the residual notes of music and the lingering scent of rosemary strewn on the floor. With that sense of sheltered peace, we will next journey to the even quieter world within medieval walls, the monasteries, where a different rhythm of life prevailed, one of prayer, study, and preservation of knowledge. Monasteries, scriptoria, and the preservation of knowledge. Leaving behind the castle's worldly bustle, we now seek the tranquil refuge of a medieval monastery. Monasteries were the quiet heart of medieval spirituality and learning, islands of contemplation in a busy world. Behind their walls, monks, and in convents, nuns, devoted themselves to prayer, scholarship, and labor, following strict routines that hardly changed day to day or century to century. This constancy and dedication allowed them to preserve ancient knowledge and produce new writings, keeping the light of learning alive through turbulent times. Let us step gently into a monastery's cloister and observe the peaceful rhythm of monastic life. Dawn in the cloister. Before the sun has even risen, the monastery is stirring. In a dim dormitory lined with wooden cots, a bell tolls softly. It is matins, the midnight office of prayer, and many monks have already been awake chanting psalms in the darkness since midnight. After a brief rest, they assemble again in the church for lauds at daybreak. Picture the scene. The monastery church is chilly and shadowy, lit by a few flickering oil lamps. Ranks of cowled figures stand in the choir stalls, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they intone a Latin hymn. The melody is plain chant, simple and hauntingly beautiful. The sound reverberates off stone arches, enveloping the space in a gentle echo. Outside, the sky moves from black to deep blue to pale grey as dawn arrives. When lauds, the dawn prayer, concludes, the monks file out in silence. Silence is much observed here, except during designated times. The monastery, we imagine, might follow the Benedictine rule, a very common rule set for Western monks, which emphasizes ora et labora, pray and work. The entire day is divided into segments for prayer, work, study, and rest in a careful balance. After prayers, some monks head to the refectory, dining hall, for a light breakfast of bread and perhaps some ale or watered wine. This meal, like most in the monastery, is taken in silence. One monk stands at a lectern reading aloud from a holy book or a treatise, maybe the lives of saints or some moral text, while the others eat quietly. The only sounds are his steady voice and the occasional clink of pottery cups or wooden spoons. After breakfast, the community disperses to their appointed tasks. In a monastery, different monks have different duties, assigned by the abbot. Some go to the fields or gardens, even monasteries, though enclaves of prayer, often maintain vegetable gardens, orchards, or vineyards for self-sufficiency. Imagine a pair of monks in brown habits, quietly hoeing the rows of a cabbage patch, dew on their sandals, sparrows flitting by. They work without idle chatter, perhaps inwardly reciting a prayer or simply enjoying the dawn chorus of birds. Other monks tend to the monastery's farm animals, cows for milk, sheep for wool, chickens for eggs. The rule of St. Benedict values manual labor as a form of service to God. So these tasks are done not grudgingly, but as part of their spiritual routine. Another group of monks heads to the scriptorium, the writing room of the monastery. This is where precious manuscripts are copied and illuminated. Let us follow them inside. The scriptorium is a long, lofty chamber with desks called lecterns, or writing desks, placed near windows to catch maximum daylight. It smells of ink, parchment, and a hint of candle wax. At each desk, a monk unrolls a scroll or opens a codex that he is copying from. Another adjusts his quill pen, trimming the tip with a small knife, and stirring his pots of ink, black for main text, red for headings, and other colors for decoration. Copying manuscripts is painstaking work. A single Bible might take years to copy in full. But these monks labor with patience and devotion, knowing that by reproducing texts, whether Holy Scripture, ancient philosophy, or works of early Christian scholars, they are preserving knowledge for future generations. Listen to the silence of the scriptorium. Occasionally, a monk might whisper, "Deo gratias," thanks be to God, when finishing a page, or softly blow on the ink to dry it. Otherwise, all you hear is the faint scratch of quills on vellum and the turning of pages. One monk, an elderly scribe with tired eyes, pauses to flex his fingers and gaze for a moment at the colored illustration he's been working on, perhaps a bright blue and gold initial capital letter that begins a chapter. He carefully dips his brush into ground lapis lazuli, a precious blue pigment, and continues painting a tiny scene within the letter, maybe of street, mark symbolized by a winged lion, or a delicate vine winding around the margins. Through such artistry, the monks not only transmit the text, but adorn it with beauty, making each manuscript a work of art, as much as a vessel for knowledge. This, too, is considered an act of worship, illuminating the word of God or wisdom to reflect its preciousness. The day progresses with a rhythm of prayer and work. Bells ring at intervals, dividing time. After a work period, the monks gather again for the mid-morning prayer, prime, then return to tasks, or perhaps reading. Within the cloister, an open courtyard, surrounded by covered walkways. Some monks stroll in contemplation. The cloister garden might have a fountain or herb beds. It is a space meant for quiet reflection. Imagine walking under the cloister arcade. To one side, the green square of grass and a simple stone fountain quietly gurgling. To the other, the ornate arched windows of the church or chapter house. Footsteps echo softly on the flagstones. A monk carrying an armful of books from the library crosses your path, nodding in greeting but saying nothing. In the chapter house, a morning meeting takes place. All monks sit together, and one reads a chapter of the rule, hence the name chapter house, and any business is discussed. If a first monk has erred, this is where gentle correction is given and penance assigned, often in a spirit of humility and love. The rule encouraged treating a wayward brother like a patient to be healed. After chapter, there might be some time for individual study or rest before the main meal of the day, midday meal and devotion. The bells call the community to the refectory for the midday meal. Today, perhaps the meal is a hearty vegetable stew with bread. Monastic diet is simple and often meatless, except for the sick or feeble who are allowed extra nourishment. Fish might be served if available, especially on holy days. The monks sit at long tables. Earthenware bowls of stew are ladled out by the kitchen brothers. All remain quiet as the prior says a blessing. Then, as they eat, a designated reader stands at a pulpit and reads aloud from an edifying book, maybe Lives of the Desert Fathers, early monks, or an excerpt from Street Augustine. The steady drone of his voice, coupled with the content, often exhorting virtue, patience, or recalling saints' examples, gives a meditative atmosphere to the meal. Each monk focuses on the nourishment and the words, refraining from conversation or distraction. In this way, even dining becomes an act of spiritual focus, rather than mere bodily indulgence. After the meal, one monk strikes a small wooden board, the signal to rise. A brief prayer of thanks is offered, and the meal concludes. In some seasons, monasteries practiced fasting or abstinence in the evening. so supper might be very sparse or skipped altogether. But when a light supper is taken, it is similar, eaten in silence, accompanied by reading, reflecting the austere virtues of monkhood. One can imagine at this hour a sense of deep contentment among the monks. The day's work is nearly done. The soul has been nourished by prayer throughout, and soon it will be time to rest. Afternoon, in the scriptorium and workshop. The early afternoon sees the monks return to their appointed labours. In one corner of the monastery, the sound of a hammer on wood can be heard. The carpentry monk is repairing a bench or building a new storage chest for the library. Not far off, the blacksmith monk at the forge is quietly beating a ploughshare for the abbey's farm or fixing iron candlesticks for the altar. Monasteries were largely self-sufficient, so they included various crafts. Many monks were skilled artisans, from brewing ale to illuminating books. Each task is done with care and a sense of offering to God. The blacksmith pauses when the bell rings for the non's prayer, mid-afternoon. He wipes his brow and heads to church with sooty hands to chant the brief office, then returns to finish while daylight lasts. Back in the scriptorium, our scribes continue their patient copying. One has finished a treatise of Aristotle, translated into Latin, a precious text of ancient learning. He carefully writes the final words, adds the scribe's customary humble note, written by Brother John, unworthy monk of this house, in the year of our Lord, perhaps adding, if there be any errors, let the reader forgive, and stretches his cramped fingers. He will later illuminate the first letter, and perhaps bind the pages into a fine leather cover. But for now, he whispers a prayer of thanks for completing the work. Such moments are quietly joyful for the monastic scholar, akin to the harvest for a farmer. In another carol, a younger monk studies grammar under the guidance of the abbey's librarian. Education is part of monastic life too. Novices learn to read Latin, sing plain chant, and sometimes even dabble in sciences like astronomy or medicine, often gleaned from the old books the monastery keeps. The preservation and slow expansion of knowledge here is happening in a very calm, incremental way, page by page, lesson by lesson, far removed from the rapid flux of our modern world, yet laying foundations that would endure. Evening, vespers, and illuminated lamps. As the sun lowers, casting golden light through the cloister arches, the bell summons everyone to vespers, the evening prayer service. This is one of the most atmospheric moments of the day. The community gathers in the church, now illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps or beeswax candles in sconces. They chant the psalms appointed for this evening, their voices perhaps a bit weary but serene. Let my prayer rise like incense, they sing, and indeed a monk is swinging a thurible down the aisle, wafting fragrant frankincense smoke that sweetens the air and symbolizes prayer rising to heaven. The amber rays of twilight filter through the high windows, mingling with lamplight and smoke, creating a sacred haze. After vespers, supper is a lighter meal, maybe some bread and cheese or pottage. In some monasteries, or during certain seasons, the evening might be a time of silence or reading. In our imagined monastery, let's say, they gather in the cloister garden after supper for a brief recreation in the summer dusk. A few monks stroll together quietly, and one points out the first star appearing. Others sit on a bench under a trellis of climbing roses, the scent hanging in the warm air, and discuss a passage of scripture read earlier or the antics of a fox that has been raiding the hen coop. There is gentle humor and fraternity in these moments. Monks may have renounced family life, But within the monastery, they have brothers and often develop deep bonds of friendship. As night fully falls, the bell rings for compline, the final prayers of the day. The monks gather once more in the dim church and sing a final hymn to the Virgin Mary or to Christ, asking for protection through the night. One monk sprinkles holy water down the rows of brothers, a gentle sprinkle that they touch to their foreheads. The abbot gives a quiet blessing. "Good night, brothers," he might say softly. Some communities allow a brief tans, "Good night," after compline. After compline, the grand silence begins. No speech until morning. Unless in absolute necessity, the monks retire to their dormitory. Picture each monk lying on a simple cot or straw mattress, still wearing the habit, perhaps with a blanket or cloak for extra warmth. The room is dark, save for a single lantern the supervisor carries to check all is well. Each man says a private prayer in his heart, then closes his eyes. Outside, the monastery grows silent and still under the night sky. The scriptorium is dark, its quills and parchments resting until tomorrow. The fields and gardens lie in shadow, the tools neatly put away. The cloister walk, which saw so many sandaled feet passing in prayer and work, is empty now. A single candle might burn before a statue of Mary in a corridor, flickering in the hush. As the monks sleep, one or two assigned to night watch might wake periodically to keep an eye on the monastery's safety, though in most cases, the greatest disturbance might be a stray fox near the hen coop. All is profoundly quiet. In a sense, time itself feels paused in this sanctuary. The rest of the world might be feasting or fighting, making merry or mischief. But here, behind these walls, is a deep well of tranquility. The knowledge copied in the scriptorium earlier today will endure for generations, a gift from these quiet souls to the future. The prayers sung will, they believe, benefit the whole world beyond the monastery, like invisible rays of grace. And the simple life they lead, governed by bells and candles, connects them to a continuity of centuries of monastics before them. We leave the monastery with an image of a lone monk, perhaps older and unable to sleep, walking softly in the moonlit cloister. He stops by the scriptorium's open window and peers in at the desk where he spent the day illuminating a gospel page. The moonlight falls on the bright colors of the miniature he painted. It glows as if alive. He smiles faintly, traces a small cross in the air as a blessing over the work, and then resumes his walk. In the distance, faintly, a wolf howls, but it feels far away and harmless, unable to breach the sanctum of peace here. With the monk's lantern bobbing gently down the cloister and the rest all silent, we carry with us the profound quiet and wisdom of this place as we move on to the more outward-facing life of towns and guilds in our next chapter. Art, music, craftsmanship, and guilds. Throughout medieval Europe, creativity found expression in many forms, from the grand artistry of cathedral builders to the humble crafts of everyday artisans. Art and music were not separate from daily life, but woven into it, often as acts of devotion or community pride. And organizing much of this creative labor were the guilds, brotherhoods of craftsmen and merchants that maintained standards, passed on skills, and provided fellowship. In this chapter, we wander into the workshops and guild halls, listening to the soft sounds of artisans at work, and perhaps a minstrel's tune drifting through a market square, savoring how the spirit of craftsmanship and artistry added color and harmony to the medieval world. A morning in the artisan's workshop. Imagine stepping off a busy town street into a carpenter's workshop on a fresh spring morning. Sunlight streams through the open doorway, illuminating motes of sawdust in the air. The scent of pine wood and linseed oil is comforting. At a sturdy workbench stands the master carpenter, shaping a plank with slow, deliberate strokes of his plane. The rhythmic shk, shk of the tool is almost like a whisper. Nearby, his young apprentice sweeps wood shavings off the floor, pausing now and then to watch intently what the master is doing. He's eager to learn. The workshop walls are hung with tools, chisels, mallets, augers, each in its place. On a side table lies the project the master is currently crafting, a new oaken door for the town church, richly carved with tracery. Though meant to be functional, it will also be a piece of art for all who enter to admire. The master runs his calloused hand gently over the carving, feeling for any rough spot, and nods in satisfaction. This carpenter is a member of the local woodworkers' guild. In fact, a small painted sign of a compass and saw, the guild emblem, hangs outside his shop. Guilds in medieval towns were associations of artisans or traders, united by their trade. They regulated quality, set rules for apprenticeships, and often had patron saints and held banquets or processions on feast days. Our carpenter learned his craft through the very path his apprentice now follows. First serving as an apprentice under a master for several years, usually starting in early adolescence, then becoming a journeyman who traveled to work under different masters for experience, and finally producing a masterpiece, a work good enough to earn the title of master and be admitted to the guild. It's a long journey, but it ensures that expertise is carefully handed down, generation to generation. In the meantime, the guild is like a family to its members, providing support if someone falls ill, ensuring widows of guildsmen get help, and maintaining fair prices and wages. Leaving the carpenters, we pass other workshops along the street. The blacksmith's forge, where a steady clang, hiss rings out as a red-hot iron is plunged into water. The cobbler's stall, where the smell of leather mingles with beeswax as he stitches a pair of boots, and the stonemason's yard by the town gate, where chisels chip away at limestone blocks destined for a new chapel. Each craft has its guild and its pride. Take the stonemasons. They are held in special esteem, for their craft builds the great churches. If we stroll near the cathedral in construction, we might see masons guiding a block into place high on the scaffolding, carving gargoyles and saints with skilled hands. They have their own secret signs and symbols, and their guild spreads knowledge across regions. Some mason marks on stones are recognizable from one city to another, evidence of how these craftsmen traveled and shared techniques. The weavers, guild, and textile arts. In a quieter setting, perhaps in an upstairs solar of a merchant's house, a group of women are at work on a large tapestry. The room is filled with soft afternoon light, and the back, a gentle clack of a loom. The tapestry depicts a lush forest scene with unicorns, a popular motif, and each woman works on a section, deftly passing colored threads through the warp. This is no mere hobby. Weaving is a major industry in some medieval towns, like the famous wool and cloth production of Flanders or Florence. Weavers, dyers, and cloth merchants all have their guilds too. The Dyers Guild jealously guards recipes for achieving vivid scarlets and deep indigos. The Weavers Guild sets the width of standard cloth and the number of threads for a quality bolt of fabric. These guilds, especially in cloth towns, can be very wealthy and even influence city governance. But in our cozy scene, we see only the peaceful side of this labor. The weavers, whispering lullaby-like songs as they count threads, a bowl of bright wool skeins at their feet. The finished portion of the tapestry rolled neatly, showing months of collaborative effort, creating something both useful and beautiful, a theme that runs through medieval craftsmanship. Music in the air. While craftsmen shape physical materials, others shape sound. Medieval music is everywhere if you listen, from the chanting of monks to the melodies of minstrels in castle halls, to the hearty songs of villagers at festival. In a town, one might hear a guild of musicians practicing together. Yes, even musicians had guild-like fraternities in some cities, or were part of minstrels' guilds attached to noble courts. Imagine an afternoon in the courtyard of a civic building where a small band of town pipers and drummers is rehearsing. The flute's notes dance lightly, accompanied by the steady beat of a tabor drum. They are preparing for the upcoming St. John's Day fair, where they will lead the procession. Passers-by smile at the familiar tune, perhaps a local dance melody, and a child skips in time with the beat. Music, like craft, is often a communal endeavor. These players likely learned from older musicians, and their repertoire includes pieces passed down through memory, not written down. In the church, more formal music is brewing. The advent of polyphony, multiple independent voices singing together, in the later Middle Ages. If we peek into a cathedral choir practice in, say, 13th century Paris, we might witness a small revolution in beauty. A master cantor guides a few young clerics as they try out a new composition where one voice holds a slow chant and others ornament it with harmonious tones. The sound is rich and strange compared to plain chant, like multiple threads of sound weaving. This development, nurtured in places like the Cathedral of Notre Dame, is laying groundwork for much of Western music to come. But for now, to a listener in that vast stone vault, it simply sounds like angels echoing one another. The choir stops and repeats a phrase until it blends just right. They practice diligently, their craft as disciplined as any guild, though their croup tools are parchment music scrolls and tuning pitches, and their product is ephemeral beauty that floats up to the vaulted ceilings and then is gone. The painters and sculptors. In a guild hall near the town square, the Painters' Guild convenes a meeting. The hall is modest but decorated with vibrant panels showing the guild's patron saint, perhaps Street Luke, traditionally considered a painter. Master painters in coloured robes sit on benches, while the guild warden reads out the charter's rules for apprentices. How many years of training? What standards of conduct? Even rules on not poaching clients from each other. Two apprentices, who have completed their masterpiece paintings, stand nervously at the front as their works, an altarpiece of the Madonna by one and a heraldic shield by another, are examined. The masters nod approvingly. These young men will be admitted as masters. There's a quiet pride in the room, knowing the craft will carry on. After formalities, the meeting ends with a prayer and a cup of ale shared. Camaraderie and mentorship are part of guild life, as much as statutes and strictures. Later, in the painter's own workshop, we watch him at work on a commission. He's been tasked with painting the town's guild shields to hang in the town hall. He carefully grinds pigments on a stone slab, red from vermilion, blue from ground azurite, green from verdigris. An apprentice heats some rabbit skin glue to mix with chalk, preparing gesso to prime new wood panels. It's a scene of focused calm. The master leans over a panel, layering gold leaf onto a carved crest, the apprentice quietly stirring a pot at the brazier. In another corner, brushes made of squirrel hair soak in a jar. Overhead, dried herbs hang. Some are used for making varnish or for keeping insects away from drying paintings. This blending of art and alchemy is typical. Medieval artisans were experimenters, working with natural materials to create lasting beauty, guild festivals, and community artistry. Though much of our journey is in individual workshops, there were times when craftspeople and artists came together to celebrate their crafts publicly. On certain feast days, guilds would sponsor pageants or plays. The famous mystery plays, often performed by guilds on wagons, each guild depicting a different biblical scene. For example, the Bakers' Guild might present the Last Supper, the Shipwrights' Guild, Noah's Ark. Think of a sunny market day turned festival. A procession of guild members march through town behind their banners, singing hymns or songs. The woodcarvers carry a large carved figure of their patron saint. The smiths perhaps carry forged lanterns alight even in daytime to symbolize their craft. Hundreds of people line the streets, enjoying the spectacle and feeling a sense of pride. These are their local artisans on display. When the plays begin, laughter and reverence mix as age-old stories are, acted out with costumes and props made by the guilds themselves. It's art, craft, and community all interwoven. As evening falls after a guild pageant, imagine the contented quiet that descends. In workshop after workshop, candles are snuffed and tools set aside. The carpenter says a brief prayer of thanks in front of a small wooden crucifix on his wall, grateful for steady hands and a productive day. The weaver carefully rolls up the nearly complete tapestry, smiling at how much was done with the help of her neighbors, and prays for the patience to finish it well. In the silence of a painter's studio, a finished panel painting of the Madonna and Child catches the faint glimmer of the banked hearth. The Virgin's painted eyes seem to gaze kindly over the darkened room. The master painter, before retiring, bows to that icon he created, dedicating his craft to God and feeling a gentle pride that his work will adorn the church and inspire many. Throughout the town, a sense of satisfaction emanates from the closed shutters of guild halls and workshops. Each craftsperson has played their part in making the world a bit more useful, a bit more beautiful that day. In an era with none of our modern technology, it was human hands and simple tools that fashioned everything necessary. Every cartwheel, every shoe, every candle, every bell. This required skill, patience, and often collaboration. And in that necessity grew a culture that valued the dignity of labor and the fellowship of guild. They became known as mysteries, reflecting the idea that each craft had its secrets and sacred knowledge. As we close our eyes on this chapter of creativity, let's hold on to the image of a master and apprentice working side by lantern light. The master carefully guides the apprentice's hand on a carving chisel, the young man's eyes fixed on the wood as a delicate pattern emerges. Outside, a faint tune from a late-working minstrel drifts on the night air. The stars above the town twinkle down on thatched roofs and church spires, and one by one, lights in the workshops wink out as the makers of things find their rest. Through guilds and apprenticeships, knowledge and skill glowed from one generation to the next, like embers kept alive in a hearth, ensuring that the dark of ignorance was held at bay by the light of craft and art. Now, as we leave the mellow glow of the guild hall, the scene transitions to the lively open air again, this time to the markets and fairs, where these goods and arts mingled in lively exchange. In the next chapter, we will stroll through marketplaces and join pilgrims and traders at great fairs, observing how community and tradition thrived in those gatherings. Markets, fairs, and medieval towns. We have visited quiet villages and busy workshops. Now we step into the vibrant world of medieval marketplaces and fairs, the beating heart of town life and long-distance trade. Medieval towns might be much smaller than modern cities, but they were bustling hubs where merchants, farmers, and customers mingled amid a patchwork of sounds and scents. Yet even in this liveliness, there is a comforting rhythm and a sense of communal gathering. Let's wander through a typical market day and then experience the excitement of a grand fair, all at a leisurely, gentle pace. Morning in the market square. The town awakens early on market day. As dawn's light filters over the half-timbered houses, farmers from nearby villages begin trundling in through the city gates with carts full of produce. The clop of donkey hooves on cobbles and the squeak of cartwheels echo in the cool morning air. In the central square, often right in the shadow of the town church or guild hall, stalls are set up. Some are simple wooden tables, others mere blankets spread on the ground. There's a pleasant urgency among the vendors as they arrange their goods. Wicker baskets filled with apples and onions, clay jars of honey, bundles of herbs still dewy, freshly baked rye loaves lined up in neat rows. The baker's booth emanates a warmth and the mouth-watering smell of bread, drawing the early customers who are out to get the best loaves before they're gone. As the sun climbs a little higher, the market comes alive. Townsfolk emerge from their homes to shop, chat, and soak in the scene. A group of children follows their mother, eyes bright at the sight of a traveling peddler, unfurling lengths of ribbon dyed in brilliant blues and reds. Nearby, a butcher sharpens his knife with a rhythmic swing sound, preparing to portion cuts of meat from a slaughtered pig hanging clean and ready. We shall not dwell on the butchery itself, only the orderly result. Even that is part of life's cycle. The noises blend harmoniously, vendors calling out prices, customers greeting friends with a hearty, "good day," chickens clucking in a coop, and somewhere a baker's boy is loudly advertising fresh bread. Market day is in full swing. In the central square, stalls with striped awnings offer a variety of goods from produce to pottery. The smell of freshly baked bread mingles with that of cured fish and leather goods. Here a farmer's wife sells bundles of garlic and onions. There a potter lays out his sturdy clay jugs and bowls. Among them stroll townsfolk and visitors alike. Perhaps a travelling monk on an errand for his monastery, or a noble steward sent to purchase supplies. The atmosphere is lively but not frantic. People move at a deliberate pace, taking time to chat and barter. A group of housewives gossip cheerfully as they examine bolts of woolen cloth being offered by a draper. A troubadour with a lute might be seated on a corner, plucking a gentle tune to entertain passers-by in hopes of a few coins. Within the half-timbered buildings, around the square, are workshops and shops of various craftsmen. One might peek through an open doorway and see a carpenter at work, sawdust on the floor, the sound of his saw adding to the town's chorus of noise. Next door, the blacksmith's forge emits a rhythmic clang as he hammers a glowing piece of iron on his anvil. These artisans usually belong to guilds, associations that represent and regulate each trade. Guilds in towns often had their own halls and patron saints, and they organized to set fair prices and uphold quality standards. No shoddy shoes sold, no watered-down ale, or the guild could fine the offender. The guild system underpinned the marketplace with a certain trust. A townsperson buying bread could trust it was the weight and quality it should be, because the Bakers' Guild ensured it. As midday arrives, the market square is at its busiest. The babble of voices, the creak of cartwheels, the occasional bark of a dog chasing after a dropped sausage. It's a cheerful symphony of daily life. If you listen closely, you might catch snatches of different languages or dialects, for markets drew travelers from afar. A wool trader from Flanders haggles with a local clothier over a bundle of undyed wool. Their conversation mixes Flemish and French, but somehow they communicate. A peddler from Italy displays fine glass beads and trinkets that awe the locals with their delicacy. Who knows? Perhaps some came from as far as Venice or beyond. Markets were small crossroads of the world. One could buy salt from the coast, tin from the mines, or spices that passed through many hands from the east. In one corner, for instance, stands a spice merchant's stall. The exotic aromas of pepper, cinnamon, and clove draw curious townsfolk. They might not afford much, but a few pennies for a pinch of spice to enliven a holy day stew is a worthwhile treat. Despite the thirst, variety, a regular order reigns. Many markets operated by long tradition. Certain families or villages always took the same spot in the square for their stalls. Generation after generation, people had their trusted vendors. This baker uses the best yeast. One woman confides to another as they queue for bread, perhaps having an early form of a chat we'd call gossip, but in the friendliest way. Who's expecting a baby? Whose cow gave a record amount of milk this week? And so on. Such social exchange was as important as commerce. Market day was when scattered farms and outlying hamlets met and mingled. Young folk courted under the pretext of shopping. News was passed. A herald might pin a proclamation to the church door, or read it aloud amid the crowd. Even justice could be done. Sometimes a wrongdoer was set in the stocks, in view of the marketplace, as a cautionary spectacle. So the market was truly the heart of a town's public life. By late afternoon, the stalls, empty. The farmers pack up unsold produce to take home, or perhaps donate to the local abbey. The square slowly clears. Children play in the open space, chasing the last stray chicken that escaped its coop earlier. Shop apprentices sweep the day's litter. Squashed fruit, straw, spilled grain, to tidy up. As the sun dips, a peaceful transformation occurs. What was a bustling marketplace just hours ago is now a quiet, open plaza. Perhaps a tired merchant sits on the edge of the fountain, rubbing his feet and thinking of the warm meal waiting at home. The dynamic energy has given way to calm once more. A grand fair day. Beyond weekly markets, medieval Europe hosted famous fairs, seasonal or annual trade events that drew merchants from great distances. These fairs were grander, more festive, almost like a town-wide holiday. Let's imagine arriving at such a fair, say one of the Champagne fairs in France in the 13th century, held in late summer. The town is fuller than usual. Every inn is occupied, and local families host merchants in spare rooms or barns. Colourful tents sprout outside the city walls, where overflow traders set up camp. There's a festive air. The fair isn't just commerce, it's also holiday. Walking into the fairgrounds in the morning, you're greeted by a panorama of stalls, grander than any normal market. Here's a line of Flemish wool merchants displaying fine broadcloth, the pride of Flanders, each bolt stamped with gild seals, guaranteeing its origin and quality. A few tents over, Italian merchants from Genoa or Venice lay out trays of glimmering glass beads, delicate silks, and even mirrors, a luxury that draws curious local folk. to see their faces reflected for perhaps the first time. Under a canopy, a seller from Moorish Spain shows off brilliantly dyed leather goods, the reds and blues so vibrant they hardly seem real. People gather around, marveling at the craftsmanship, tongues stumbling over the merchant's accented French as they try to ask the price. Despite the variety of tongues, one hears snippets of Middle Dutch, Italian, Spanish, even Arabic. There is a surprising order to the fair. The organizers, often local authorities or counts, arranged sections by trade, and guards patrol to ensure peace. It is busy, yes, but not chaotic. In fact, one could find it rather exhilarating, yet strangely safe, like a well-organized festival. The fair announcer's voice rings out occasionally, maybe declaring the start of a jousting tournament in the afternoon, or reminding of the evening curfew. For even fairs must sleep. Let's slip away from trade for a moment and explore the fair's softer side as dusk falls. After a day of bargaining and selling, merchants and visitors are ready to unwind. The central square is cleared, and local taverns spill out tables to serve foaming ale and spiced wine. A group of travelling minstrels strikes up music, lutes, a fiddle, a small harp, drawing a crowd of both townsfolk and foreigners. Their tune is lively, but can be enjoyed in a relaxed lean against a post or bench. Children dance in a circle, taught steps by a patient elder sister. The glow of torches and braziers lights faces from below, creating a warm, flickering theatre of human expressions. Laughter rises easily. Language barriers fall away when a jester's troupe performs playful skits, requiring no translation. People clap and hoot merrily at the universal humour of pratfalls and silly faces. Now the fairground under the night sky is a tapestry of lights and mellow sounds. Vendors have locked away their precious goods and joined the camaraderie. Perhaps a German merchant raises a toast with an English wool trader, having clinched a deal earlier. And though they speak broken versions of each other's tongues, they find fellowship in the shared relief of work done and profit made. A local baker provides hearty meat pies for supper, the savoury aroma mixing with the sweetness of a confectioner's honey cakes from another stall. This might be the one time in a year such diverse folk sit together. There's something heartwarming about it, as if the fair not only exchanged goods, but wove a brief community of its own. Evening in the town, whether on an ordinary market day or during a special fair, eventually the town quiets down. Let's return to our more familiar small town after its weekly market. By sunset, the market square is empty, save for a stray cat sniffing where the fishmonger had been. Residents shut their wooden shutters, and shop signs creaking in signs, the painted symbols of each trade, sway gently in the breeze. A town watchman makes rounds, calling the hour and ensuring no stray embers from a cooking fire could spark trouble. Towns often had watchmen or a curfew bell for safety. Through a narrow street, you might catch a final glimpse of communal life. In a tavern yard, a few neighbours linger over ale, discussing the day's gossip, who sold out of apples by noon, whose cow got loose in the square, the news a travelling merchant brought of a distant king's coronation. Their voices are low and congenial, echoing gently off timber and plaster walls. Soon, a calm darkness settles. The clatter of trade has faded, replaced by the occasional distant barking of a dog or the muffled sound of a lullaby being sung to a child behind closed shutters. The town rests, gathering strength for tomorrow's daily chores or the next market. In that peaceful moment, the outlines of the marketplace still remain in memory. The good-natured bargaining, the tapestry of faces, the rich smells and bright colours. All of it speaks of a society not isolated in dull drudgery, but periodically gathering to celebrate abundance, exchange skills and wares, and affirm connections between countryside and town, between different regions and cultures. As we close our eyes now and imagine the empty moonlit market square, perhaps the moon glints off the metal hinges of the market cross or fountain at its centre. We feel the contentment of a day well spent. The medieval town, with all its commerce and guilds and fairs, ultimately provided people a sense of belonging to a community larger than themselves. They could come to market knowing they would meet friends, hear news, perhaps earn the means to support family, and return home with both essentials and little delights. A ribbon, a sweet, a story to tell. That security and gentle pleasure permeate our thoughts as we prepare to journey onward. Our next travels will move from the worldly town to the spiritual again, following those who roamed for faith and wonder, as we explore the pilgrimages and sacred journeys that were another key part of the medieval world's tapestry. The influence of the church and the rhythm of religious life. From cradle to grave, the medieval European's life was cradled in the arms of the church, not just in spiritual belief, but in the very cadence of daily and yearly life. The influence of Christianity was a constant, gentle presence, like a steady drumbeat keeping time. Bells rang to announce the hours of prayer. Saints' feast days punctuated the year with festivals, and the great events of life, birth, marriage, harvest, death were all sanctified with church rites. In this chapter, we find solace in that sacred rhythm, the regular, predictable cycle of worship and rest that gave meaning and structure to medieval existence. Dawn and dusk, the daily cycle. Imagine a small village at first light. As we've seen, the roosters crow and sunrise stir the peasants to begin their work. But another sound often accompanied dawn, the church bell ringing the Angelus. In many places, at early morning, noon, and evening, a bell was rung to call everyone to a moment of prayer, wherever they were. In our village, the bell hangs in a modest wooden belfry of the parish church, a simple stone chapel with a thatched roof that sits on a little rise above the cottages. As the pink light of dawn spreads, the bell's tone, ding, 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 rolls over the misty fields. A ploughman in the far field hears it, pauses, and removes his cap. A housewife at her hearth stops stirring porridge for a moment to murmur a Hail Mary. The Angelus bell signals that all labour, however humble, is offered alongside a prayer, a sanctification of the day's start. Similarly, at noon, the bell peals and villagers might cross themselves and take a short rest under the noonday sun. And at dusk, its gentle tolling reminds everyone to give thanks for the day's blessings and seek peace for the night. These daily prayers, brief and woven into routine, create a quiet unity. Even if people are far apart in fields or workshops, the sound of the bell ties them into one community of faith. It is a comforting sound, as familiar as one's own heartbeat. In a time without clocks for most, the bells were the beloved timekeepers. They announced not only prayers but also events, a wedding's joyful peal, a funeral's somber toll. So the church quite literally set the rhythm of each day. Sunday, the weekly haven, now zoom out to the week's cycle. Sunday, the Lord's Day, was a day of rest and worship. For peasants who toiled from Monday to Saturday, Sunday was a precious pause. Imagine a clear Sunday morning in our village. Instead of grabbing tools at dawn, families put on cleaner tunics, and dresses, perhaps the only slightly finer clothes they have, kept for church. The whole village, from the aging grandfather with a walking stick to toddlers toddling beside mothers, wends its way to the little church as the bell rings brightly. Overhead, swallows dart around the bell tower in the blue sky. Inside the church, it's cool and dim. Simple wooden benches, or often just standing room, accommodate the congregation. Sunbeams through the small stained glass window, maybe a simple design of a cross or a patron saint, cast patches of coloured light on the earthen floor. The parish priest, vested in plain but clean robes, leads the Mass. He intones the ancient Latin prayers that most villagers do not fully understand by words, but they know them by heart in sound and meaning. When he raises the Eucharistic bread, the people instinctively bow their heads or kneel, experiencing a moment of sacred mystery. Perhaps a small local choir, just a few men or boys, sings a chant hymn, their untrained voices earnest and devout. The music echoes softly in the little nave. For the villagers, this hour is the spiritual anchor of the week. It provides comfort and community. Standing shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, they feel a sense of shared existence under God's gaze. The priest might preach in their language, giving simple counsel, to be kind, to avoid quarreling, to care for the sick. He reminds them of the example of some saint whose feast was that week, inspiring them with a story of virtue. These teachings sink in deeply, as most of the flock cannot read and rely on such sermons for moral guidance and the news of the wider Christian world. After Mass, the churchyard becomes a friendly social scene. Children play tag among the gravestones. Death is familiar, but not feared here on hallowed ground. Adults chat. The week's events, good or bad, are hashed over, advice exchanged. If it's autumn, perhaps the priest has blessed the first fruits of the harvest, and now on the grass lies a display of pumpkins, sheaves of wheat, apples, which people will distribute and share. Sunday may also be when the local lord, if nearby, frees the serfs from labour on his demesne, so they can attend church and rest from their labours. Thus, the influence of the church ensures a measure of humanity in the feudal routine. Everyone, even the lowest serf, has God's mandate to rest on Sundays and holy days. It is a divine right to respite, woven into society, the year's tapestry of feasts. Beyond weekly rhythm, the church calendar painted the year with seasons of fasting and feasting, of penance and celebration. Life's hard labor was sweetened by these recurring holy days, holidays, which were often the only days of leisure and merrymaking. Consider the joy of a major feast, like Easter or Christmas in a medieval town or village. For weeks prior, people have observed a somber Lent or Advent, fasting from certain foods, saying extra prayers, building anticipation. Then, when the holy day arrives, an explosion of joy. Church bells ring with abandon. Processions wind through the lanes with candles and flowers. The stern fast gives way to the best meal the community can afford. Take Easter, its dawn, and villagers gather outside the dark church, holding unlit candles. The priest lights a new fire, symbolizing Christ's resurrection, and from that flame, candles are lit, one by one. Imagine the beautiful sight. In the chilly grey light of early morning, tiny flames blossom among the crowd until dozens of faces glow in warm light. They process into the church, singing a simple refrain of Alleluia, the word that had been buried all Lent, returning now like a longed-for friend. During the Mass, the joy is palpable. Perhaps the small choir has practiced a more complex polyphonic piece just for Easter, or the priest has decorated the altar with extra ribbons and the first lilies of spring. Afterward, the village bursts into festivity. Families might crack decorated eggs. Eggs were forbidden in Lent and now rejoiced in. Children roll them on the ground in games. Tables are set out for a communal breakfast on the green. Brown bread, fresh cheese, maybe a bit of meat shared all around. Ale flowing. Everyone wears just a bit of their best. A brightly dyed hood or a bren. Flower garland on the ladies. It is not just a religious observance, but a communal renewal of hope and cheer. The church also instituted saints' feast days, which in many localities became fair days or times of guild pageants, as we saw earlier. On street, John's Day, Midsummer, for example, villagers might light bonfires at night, a leftover of older solstice customs now wrapped into a saint's day. They dance gently around the fire, sing folk songs that have been given Christian verses, and the priest might bless the herb bundles thrown into the flames. On street, Martin's Day in November, after harvest, there might be a tradition of feasting on a roast goose and tasting the new wine. The church bells ring out to signify the end of fieldwork for the year and the start of winter's rest. On All Hallows Eve and All Saints Oct 31, Nov 1, they remember the departed with candles on graves and prayers in church. Each season has its sacred marker, Candlemas, Feb 2, with candles. Blessed to carry light through the end of winter. Rogation days in spring, when priest and people walked the boundaries of the village, praying for good crops, etc. These feasts and fasts gave a psychological comfort beyond the physical. They made time itself feel cyclical and meaningful, rather than a monotonous grind. A peasant in a cold rain of February could think, soon will come Easter and spring warmth. A craftsman overloaded with summer work could look to the relief of the Yuletide. 12 days of celebration. Medieval Christmas was often a nearly 2-week period of minimal work and maximal merriment following the religious observances. And always, the church sanctified these times. The High Mass on Christmas, with its carols and creche street. Francis of Assisi began the custom of nativity scenes, and by later Middle Ages, one might see small reenactments of Bethlehem in churches, the 3 days of solemnity at Easter, culminating in jubilation, etc. Life, milestones under church care. Beyond communal schedules, the church accompanied each person through life's key moments, like a caring, ever-present guide. When a baby was born, soon after the little one would be carried to the baptismal font in the parish church. Picture a tiny infant, swaddled tightly, held by godparents, usually close friends or relatives chosen by the parents, standing anxiously by the old stone font filled with holy water. The priest, smiling, pours water gently over the child's forehead thrice, speaking the ancient formula to baptize into the community of faith. The baby usually cries at the cold water, but the mother is ready with a warm cloth. The whole village may attend, for a new Christian among them is an event of joy. Often a small feast with ale and bread follows at the family's home. This baptism isn't just a private affair. It means the child is now under the guardianship of the church, and everyone present, as godparents and neighbors, pledge in a sense to help raise the child rightly. It takes a village, indeed, and the baptism ceremony binds that village together in responsibility for its youngest member. At the other end of life, when someone lay dying, the parish priest or a friar would come to give last rites, prayers and anointing, easing the person's fears and pain with hope of heaven. Villagers would gather to pray outside or quietly in the home, a vigil of candles and whispered rosaries through the night if need be. The funeral that followed might be somber, but also touched with comforting ritual, tolling bell, counting the age of the deceased in slow beats. The coffin, often just a wooden plank box, or even a shroud, if poor, borne by kin, along a familiar path to the churchyard, and the priest's words, from earth to earth, ashes to ashes, reminding all of resurrection promised. Though grief was real, people found solace in the sense that death was a doorway, accompanied by the same church that midwifed their entry into the world at baptism. It was all of a piece, a consistent nurture, and between baptism and funeral, the sacraments of marriage and others likewise were woven into communal life. A medieval village wedding was both a holy sacrament and the biggest party around. After exchanging vows at the church door, a custom then, many marriages were blessed just outside the church entrance. The couple would enter for mass, then emerge, to ringing bells and cheers. There'd be dancing on the green, tables heavy with food contributions from everyone, a potluck feast centuries before the term existed, and the priest likely raising a toast of wine for the newlyweds' prosperity. The church's presence in marriage helped ensure commitments were public and stable. Everyone knew who was wed to whom, making rights and duties clear, gentle guidance and sanctuary. The Church of the Middle Ages was not just rituals and authority. It was often the primary source of charity, education, and refuge for the vulnerable. Monasteries ran hospitals and almshouses. Parish priests distributed alms from tithes to the needy. A poor widow might quietly receive a loaf of bread from the church store, or orphan children might be taken in and taught simple skills by kindly nuns. The ethos of corporal works of mercy, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, etc., was deeply ingrained. For example, on certain feast days like Maundy Thursday, nobles and clergy would wash the feet of the poor and give food as an imitation of Christ's humility and care. On Street, Nicholas's Day, gifts might be given to children or dowries provided to poor maidens for marriage. All these small acts, done in the church's name, made it a living mother to the medieval populace. Additionally, the church provided something less tangible but greatly soothing, a worldview that made sense of suffering and hope. If crops failed or plague struck, people flocked to church not only for physical help, but for prayers and processions, believing that divine aid would come. These collective rituals in times of crisis, carrying saints' relics around the fields, singing litanies, gave psychological comfort even when material solutions were few. The church taught that this life's hardships were not the end. There was an eternal life where wrongs would be righted. Believing this sincerely would have lent strength to the weary ploughman and consolation to the grieving mother. In every village and town, the church building itself stood as a symbol of refuge. Its doors were literally sanctuary. By law, fugitives could claim safety from execution by staying in a church for a set time. Spiritually too, anyone troubled could slip into the cool shadows of the nave, kneel before the flickering vigil candles at a statue of Mary or the patron saint, and pour out their heart in silent prayer, perhaps leaving with a lighter soul. It was like stepping out of ordinary and into a more peaceful dimension, if only for a few minutes. The smell of incense, the colourful window depicting a holy scene, the distant chanting of monks if near an abbey. These sensory experiences of faith were as real as medicine for many. As we take leave of this chapter, picture one last scene, embodying the rhythm of religious life. It's evening, and across the dark fields of a manor, the small windows of the church glow with candlelight. Inside, a handful of villagers and the priest are singing Compline, the day's last prayer, their voices soft and a little tired but full of trust. Watch o'er thy church, O Lord, we pray. Guard us sleeping through the night, that awake we may keep watch with Christ, and asleep, rest in his light. The melody rises and falls, and outside the church door, a farmer passing by with his ox cart pauses, doffs his cap, and listens for a moment. He feels a reassuring calm, knowing that prayer is being offered, covering him and his loved ones, even if he's too weary to join this night. The bell rings one final time, a clear note in the still air. Then all is quiet. The stars come out. Another day in medieval Christendom has ended. An ordinary day, yet sanctified quietly by many moments of grace. Tomorrow the cycle will begin anew with the morning bell, as it did for their parents and will for their children, creating an unbroken chain of hope and continuity. Pilgrimage routes and sacred journeys. Our final journey in this medieval narrative is not one bound to a single village or town, but one that winds over hills and far horizons. The journey of the pilgrim. In an age when travel was slow and arduous, thousands nonetheless took to the roads and trails, driven by faith and hope. They walked to holy shrines and far-off cathedrals, seeking healing, penance, adventure, or a closer touch of the divine. These sacred journeys, or pilgrimages, were perhaps the ultimate example of finding peace in motion. As we follow the gentle footsteps of medieval pilgrims, we enter a moving tapestry of landscapes, prayers, and quiet camaraderie. Setting forth at dawn, imagine a pale gold sunrise over the plains of northern Spain in the 12th century. Along a dusty road, fields of wheat on either side still laced with morning mist. A small band of travelers walks steadily westward. They carry simple walking sticks and wear broad hats. Some have a scallop shell attached to their hat or cloak, the emblem of St. James. These are pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, one of the era's most famous pilgrim routes, leading to the shrine of the Apostle James in Compostela. They have come from afar, perhaps starting in France, and have been on the road for many weeks, covering around 15 miles a day on foot. In the soft morning light, the pilgrims' shadows stretch long ahead of them, as if pointing the way. The air is cool and fresh. A young woman among them begins to softly sing a familiar pilgrim hymn, Dum Pater Familias, a song known along this route, and one by one, the others join in, their voices low and carrying gently across the quiet fields. The rhythm of their walking and the melody become one. There is a profound serenity in this moment. Each pilgrim is alone with his or her thoughts, yet also part of a fellowship, moving with one heart towards a sacred goal. Along the road, kindness and reflection. As the morning passes, the sun rises higher, and the pilgrims rest by a clear stream. One older man fills a leather flask with water and offers it to a weary younger pilgrim with a blistered foot. They do not speak the same language. Perhaps one is English, the other Italian, but smiles and gestures suffice. The bond of pilgrimage transcends words. This small act of kindness is typical on the road. Pilgrims often looked out for one another, forming impromptu groups for safety and companionship. Continuing on, they traverse a woodland where the only sounds are birdsong and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Traveling on foot for days on end, they have learned to notice things often missed. the particular fragrance of pine resin in the midday heat, or how the sunbeams slant through the forest in columns of golden dust. The journey itself becomes a moving meditation. Many pilgrims walk silently for long stretches, using the time to pray or simply to clear the mind. A knight, doing penance for past deeds, may quietly recite prayers with each step. A widow seeking consolation might whisper her late husband's name now and then, feeling him close in the green hush of the woods. They say that on pilgrimage, every hill can remind you of Calvary, and every sunrise of the resurrection. Nature itself becomes a church, and the road a path of redemption. Villages along the way are accustomed to seeing these travelers. As the group reaches a small hamlet by late afternoon, children run out calling Buen Camino, good journey, or the local equivalent. The villagers know pilgrims bring blessings, and a bit of business too. At the edge of town stands a simple stone cross and a fountain where our pilgrims gratefully drink and wash the day's dust from their hands and faces. They find lodging perhaps in a rudimentary hospice, run by monks or local laypeople. The accommodations are humble, straw pallets in a barn or the church loft. But to tired bodies, it feels heaven sent. A bowl of hot stew and coarse bread is shared communally as the pilgrims swap stories of their homes and reasons for pilgrimage. One man shows a little lead badge he obtained at Canterbury, a previous pilgrimage of his, bearing the imprint of Street Thomas Becket, and others murmur appreciatively, passing it around. Another reveals that she is walking to Compostela to give thanks for her child's recovery from illness. Around the firelight, her companions nod, and some make the sign of the cross, touched by her devotion, evening prayer, and starry skies. Before sleep, they join the villagers in the tiny local church for evening prayer. Candlelight wavers on the whitewashed walls as a monk intones plain chant in Latin. The pilgrims, though from different lands, all know the Salve Regina and sing it together, their varied accents merging in the ancient melody. In that moment, whether noble or peasant, local or foreign, all kneel side by side as simply children of God under the watch of painted wooden saints and the gentle gaze of Mary's statue. There is a deep equality and peace in the pilgrim life. Stripped of home comforts and status, everyone becomes, as the saying went, a pauper for Christ, reliant on divine providence and human kindness. Later that night, some pilgrims cannot sleep despite their fatigue. Perhaps the aches of the journey or the excitement of nearing their goal keeps them awake. One by one, they step outside to get cool air. What greets them is a magnificent panorama of stars. Out here, far from city lights, the Milky Way sprawls across the sky in a dazzling river of white. In fact, medieval people often called the Milky Way the Way of St. James, believing it was a celestial reflection of the earthly road, guiding pilgrims westward. Our pilgrims smile at the sight. It feels as if heaven itself is encouraging them onward. A young pilgrim quietly prays under the stars, thanking God for safe passage so far, and marveling that the same stars shine over home and destination alike, connecting everything under one canopy. Arrival at the sacred destination. Finally, after many trials and triumphs, the band of pilgrims crests a hill one morning, and before them lies Santiago de Compostela. The grand cathedral's spires reach into a brilliant blue sky. Some pilgrims weep openly at the sight. Others fall to their knees and cross themselves. They have arrived. Entering the city, they join throngs of other pilgrims from all corners of Europe. A babble of languages and a rainbow of regional dress, all converging on the holy site in joy. Bells peal from the cathedral towers in festive welcome. They ring at mass times, but this sounds like special peals for a feast day, or perhaps simply for the constant arrival of souls. Inside the Romanesque Gothic cathedral, cool arches soar overhead. The pilgrims line up to embrace the gilded statue of St. James above the high altar, a customary act symbolizing greeting the saint at journey's end. Each takes a turn, climbing behind the altar to briefly place their hands on the apostles' shoulders from behind and whisper a prayer into the space. Some pray for those they left at home, some for forgiveness, some in thanks or supplication. Afterwards, they descend to the crypt, where a silver reliquary holds St. James's bones. Candles flicker everywhere. A hush prevails, broken only by distant chanting. Many are overwhelmed with a mix of exhaustion and spiritual elation, a sense of fulfillment that is both personal and collective, as they share this moment with hundreds of others in silent communion. During the special Pilgrim's Mass, incense swings from the great thurible, Botafumero, leaving trails of sweet smoke in the nave. Our pilgrims stand among a crowd, each holding a small taper. When it's time, they step forward to receive the pilgrim's blessing and the Latin certificate of completion, the Compostela. But more than these tokens, they carry home an inner transformation. In the soft afternoon, many will collapse in the hospice to sleep deeply, but perhaps one or two wander the city's cloisters and gardens, marveling that they truly made it. A kind monk pours them wine and says, "Pax et bonum," peace and goodness to you. Peace and goodness. That is exactly what they feel. Homeward bound, a new beginning. After a few days' rest in Compostela, our pilgrims depart for home. Interestingly, many medieval pilgrims described the return journey as different. The roads that felt so long now seem shorter, with the spring of accomplishment in their step. They carry home badges or souvenirs from the shrine, the scallop shell being most famous, plucked from Galicia's shores as proof of reaching Santiago. But the true souvenir is the memory and subtle change within. They have experienced the wide world beyond their village, prayed in great cathedrals, forged friendships without words, and learned that, as an old pilgrim saying goes, to arrive is to return, and to return is to arrive. The lessons and tranquility found on the road become part of their everyday life now. Perhaps the once quick-tempered knight is more patient with his household. The grieving widow has found hope to live on. The young adventurer has grown in wisdom and gratitude. We watch them take their leave. One dawn, a group of pilgrims sets out from Santiago's gate, heading east now. The sun at their backs casts long shadows ahead of them. They are literally walking out of their own shadow, renewed. As they disappear over a gentle slope, the world around is quiet again. To close our eyes and envision pilgrimage is to feel a gentle motion, a forward momentum that is never hurried. The pilgrim's path is one of discovery, but also of letting go, each step shedding worry, each mile building trust in providence. Many who could not undertake such journeys themselves took comfort in just knowing they were possible, and hearing tales from returned pilgrims. In a sense, all of medieval life was considered a pilgrimage, a transient journey of the soul toward the ultimate heavenly home. This belief gave people perspective. Hardships on the way were like blisters or bad weather on pilgrimage, painful but temporary, and not reason to abandon hope of reaching the destination. Our narrative has followed many paths, from peasant huts to cathedral choirs, from manor halls to wandering pilgrims. At each turn, we found an aspect of medieval life that, despite difficulties, offered moments of calm, community, and meaning. Now, at the end of this long day's journey into night, imagine we too are pilgrims returning home. We carry with us the images of starlit skies, candlelit churches, golden harvests, and kindly faces met along the way. The medieval world, so often painted as only dark or violent, reveals itself in these quiet reflections as also a world of radiant faith, enduring friendships, seasonal joys, and deep-rooted peace. As you drift now into slumber, let the soft footfalls of those pilgrims, the distant song of their prayer at eventide, and the gentle ringing of a church bell far away lull your mind. We have walked through castles and cloisters, markets and meadows, and found tranquility awaiting us there. In this meditative journey, medieval Europe, cathedrals, castles, and commoners, we discovered that even in an age very different from ours, the fundamental search for peace, community, tradition, spirituality, and artistic expression was ever present. In the prayer of a monk at midnight, in the lullaby a mother hums by the hearth, in the careful art a craftsman etches, and in the pilgrim's steady trek toward a sacred horizon. Now, let all those distant bells, soft chants, and evening breezes converge into a soothing hush. In the words of an old blessing, may the road rise up to meet you, the wind be always at your back, and until we wake again to a new dawn, may gentle peace enfold you, now and forever. Good night.